Chapter 836. One of the targets was Agar Dorji. However, for some reason the bullet that should have hit his chest only hit his shoulder instead. Fresh blood gushed out from the wound, causing Agar Dorji to scream in pain. My lord, my lord. The soldiers ran over and surrounded Agar Dorji to prevent anyone from hurting him. At the same time they looked around vigilantly, searching for the assassin. But how could they know the power of a sniper rifle? A sniper more than 1,000 meters away was already beyond their knowledge. How could they still find him? Not to mention the city was already in chaos. This was the best cover for them. Stop shouting. I'm not dead. Quick, inform the other generals. Retreat, retreat. Agadorji felt the pain coming from his right arm as he gave orders to his bodyguard beside him. My lord, are we not going to defend the city? One of the soldiers asked an idiotic question. Defend my ass. Don't you see? The fire has already started, the people's minds are in chaos. The city cannot be defended. All right, go inform the other generals we are retreating in the direction of Guangwu town quickly. After Agadorji shouted these words, he finally fainted from the pain. Following that, everyone was busy shouting. However, even at this time, there were still some bodyguards who didn't forget to go to the Drunken Joy Pavilion. They wanted to find the young master and let him take charge of the situation. However, the reality only proved that this was just a beautiful idea. Fan Yuhai was also attacked by the beheading operation. Regrettably, this person's residence was a little too remote. Perhaps because he was naturally vigilant, his surroundings were filled with his personal guards who had followed him since the Jiaoji period, making it impossible for Baizhou to approach. In the end, he could only choose to set up an ambush at a distance of 1,600 meters. But to be honest, at such a distance the effectiveness of a sniper rifle was very low. Captain Baizhou was the one who personally carried out this mission. He knew that this person was the only one in the city who gave the sixth young master the most headaches. If he could kill this person, it would be his greatest achievement. Baizhou held his breath and focused his mind. Even though the cold wind was howling in his ears, his posture did not change at all. He continued to stare at his target, waiting for the best opportunity to attack. Through the infrared scope, he saw Fan Yuhai get on his horse and lead a group of cavalrymen out of the courtyard. They headed straight for the main street and the distance between them shortened. 1,000 meters, 800 meters, the best distance was only 500 meters. However, the best angle and opportunity to shoot did not appear. Fan Yuhai, who was surrounded by bodyguards, gave off a feeling that they did not know where to start. It seemed that no matter which shot was fired, it would be difficult to hit the target. Even if the shot was fired, it would be difficult to guarantee that the shot would hit the target while moving. Forget it. Baizhou's heart sank again. He adjusted his target again. This time he decided not to hit the man but the horse. Relatively speaking, a horse's body was much larger than a human's, especially the pure black horse that Fan Yuhai was riding. Even on the battlefield it was like a crane among chickens. When the target changed, it was quickly locked, followed by the sound of a gunshot. Bang! The sound of the gunshot was accompanied by the scene of the warhorse falling down and Fan Yuhai flying up. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Baizhou shot again, but unfortunately because he was too anxious, this shot did not hit the target but hit a bodyguard. Blood splashed and the bodyguard fell to the ground and died. In exchange, other people shouted to protect the general. Baizhou quietly took advantage of this chaos. The sniper's rule was that once the shot missed, they must withdraw immediately. Otherwise it would not be him sniping others but others would snipe him. General Lu Duo, who was in the team, immediately came to Fan Yuhai, who fell to the ground. He saw that the general's face was covered with mud and snow, and even one of his front teeth was knocked out. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He exclaimed, "General, are you okay?" "I'm fine." He felt pain all over his body, but fortunately, every part of his body was still intact, so he was relieved. However, when he thought about the battle before him, he still said to Lu Duo, "Quick, immediately cover the retreat. Find Khan Sud and follow him out of Yunde City. We can't stay here any longer." At this moment, Fan Yuhai's heart was filled with too much unwillingness. Over the past 2 days his reputation in the army had increased day by day, and the morale of the army had also increased step by step. He was the first person to face the god of war and not admit defeat. He even shouted at the other party to retreat. Because of this, he had become a hero in the eyes of some people. If he had a few more days, he would have even made up his mind to go all out and fight to the end. Unfortunately, Yang Qindong wasn't a person who didn't fight back. He finally started to fight back, and it was so fierce. The explosion of crude oil caused a big fire and panic in the city. The south gate was blown open, and the defense of the city was no longer foolproof. Now that he was injured, although his life wasn't in danger, he had lost the ability to move freely for a short period of time. Under such a disadvantage, he was afraid that he could only abandon the city. However, he knew that his battle with Yang Qindong wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the grassland. Of course, because of the lack of information, he didn't know that Khan Sud, Agadorji, and some other generals had been shot. If he knew, he would have given the order to retreat even more decisively. Lu Duo had always been by Fan Yuhai's side. Since the time in Jiaoji, he could see that his general was extraordinary. Facts had proven that no matter how many times others had been defeated by the mercenaries, even if their countries had been destroyed and they had lost their lives, General Fan had always protected himself well. Just this point alone was enough to earn Lu Duo's respect. Now that the general had given the order, he would definitely do his best to carry it out. After agreeing, he ordered someone to pass on the order. Then he found a large wooden plank and placed Fan Yuhai on it, before leaving with his head held high. At the east gate of Wanda City, there were a few gaping holes in the walls. Following these holes, the mercenaries easily entered. What followed was a battle cry that shook the heavens. The 2,000 Mongol soldiers that were in charge of defending this area became the first target. Over 10,000 Mongol soldiers came from different directions like a tornado. Even a man and a blade wasn't something that these 2,000 Mongol soldiers could withstand. Very quickly, this army was swallowed up by the flood of horses. After successfully entering the city, they could see many Mongol soldiers on horseback searching for their troops. When these people saw the mercenaries charging into the city, they immediately scattered and wanted to leave. However, in front of the mercenaries who had a plan in mind, their actions were laughable. When the first regiment had their own mission, they only needed to follow the orders. As for the Mongol soldiers blocking their way, they could just casually kill them. Regiment after regiment of mercenaries entered the city, and the independent division led by Tiger Mang set their sights on Sud Khan, who was constantly running away. When the scouts reported that a large group of Mongol soldiers was retreating towards the north of the city, he immediately made a decision and led a division of cavalry to chase after them. The previous defeat had always been a pain in Tiger Man's heart. Originally, he wanted to perform better, but he never expected that he would be defeated in the end. Although the sixth young master did not punish him for this matter, and did not even say a harsh word, he knew in his heart that the young master must be disappointed in him. When one made a mistake, it wasn't something that could be fixed with just a sentence. What Hu Mang wanted to do was to establish a new merit and prove his worth once again. This time, after hearing the direction that the Mongolian cavalry fled in, he sent a personal guard to inform the sixth young master. Then he led his men and chased after them. Tiger's man wanted to wipe away his shame, and this time he was really going all out. He ordered his soldiers to place their excess equipment outside and left a battalion of soldiers to guard it. Following that, he took back the horses of this battalion. He wanted to increase the speed of his troops to the maximum and wanted to catch up to the escaping enemy. Tiger's man left the city. Even though the independent division wasn't fully replenished after the previous battle, Tiger's man didn't hesitate at all with 5,000 soldiers. He knew that the time to beat the drowning dog had arrived. At this moment, there was no time to hesitate. Tiger's man left the city and chased after the enemy at an extremely fast speed. In order to ensure that he could catch up to the enemy, he used all the flares he had. Every time he ran a certain distance, he would fire a shot to light up the path of the army. The Mongol army that left the city first was originally a little flustered. However, after leaving the city, their panic slowly faded. Although the mercenaries had caught them off guard and even Sud Khan, Fan Yuhai, and a few other generals were injured or killed, they still had their own advantage. That was that their numbers were still many times that of the enemy. Based on this, as long as the mercenaries weren't stupid or crazy, they definitely wouldn't chase after them. When more and more people had such thoughts in their hearts, suddenly, the scouts behind them sent news that they had discovered a large group of mercenaries following them. Many of the generals were stunned. Did these mercenaries not want to live anymore? Weren't they afraid that they would die if they chased after them? General Chen, I'll give you 3,000 cavalrymen. Stay behind and bring up the rear. Remember, it's best if you can take down the enemy. If you can't, delay for a while before leaving. Lu Duo, who had temporarily taken over Fan Yuhai's position, said to one of his subordinates. General Chen was asked to stay behind. Although he had a bitter expression, he knew that he couldn't disobey orders. He could only nod his head and leave with 3,000 cavalrymen. The Mongol army continued to retreat. Lu Duo looked at the dark sky and hoped that the sun would rise. As long as the sun rose, he would be able to clearly see the actions of the mercenaries. He wouldn't give them any chance to launch a sneak attack. If they did well, it wasn't impossible for them to counterattack. Chapter 837. General Qin led the 3,000 cavalrymen back and coincidentally bumped into Tiger's mane. Just as he got into position and raised his saber to kill, a white light suddenly flashed in front of his eyes. The strong light made him unable to open his eyes for a moment. Fortunately, this feeling disappeared quickly. However, before the light disappeared, his eyes couldn't help but twitch because he seemed to see the cavalrymen on the other side raising their spears, and then, there was no then. The 6 battalions of musketeers used the flare to lock onto the approximate location of the enemy. Then, gunshots rang out and the Mongolian cavalrymen who were still in a daze were shot off their horses one after another. When the distance was less than 500 meters, the power of the Type 81 assault rifles had already exceeded the imagination of some people. After the gunshots, there was the sound of war horses galloping on the ground. Tiger's mane led the other cavalrymen and quickly rushed over. Taking advantage of the moment when the enemy was stunned, they raised their sabers and slashed down. As they slashed, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell off their horses one after another. Without knowing the enemy's situation and the fact that they were defeated, the 3,000 Mongolian cavalrymen couldn't even unleash their advantage and were pierced through by the arrow formation. Naturally, the reason why they were able to succeed so smoothly was because they weren't elites to begin with. They were all recruited by Fan Yuhai when he was roaming the grasslands. Their combat strength could only be said to be average. Their numbers were inferior, their quality was inferior, and even their will to fight was much weaker. After just one wave of attack, they took at least 1,000 heads. After just one attack, the 3,000 cavalry were crippled. General Qin was unfortunately killed by a musket. Without a head, the Mongolian cavalrymen scattered like birds and beasts. Those who could run ran away without a trace. Those who couldn't immediately threw down their weapons and surrendered. Leave a battalion to look after the captives. Also take away their war horses. Everyone get 2 horses and continue the chase. After tasting the sweetness of victory, Tiger's mane didn't have any intention of stopping. To him, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Unless the sun was about to rise, unless his independent division was crippled, he wouldn't stop the chase. The Mongolian cavalry was still retreating at a moderate pace. Although they were retreating in a hurry, they still brought a large amount of rations with them when they left. This was also the reason why they could not run fast. Half an hour after General Chen's 3,000 men were sent out, another scout reported that there were still mercenaries chasing after them, and they were less than 8 miles away. For cavalry, a distance of 8 miles could be covered in 2 or 3 charges. Hearing this, Lu Duo wanted to stop the army and have a head-on clash with the mercenaries, but he was worried that he would fall into their trap. He wanted to ask General Fan, who was already unconscious, but he was afraid that this would show his incompetence. In the end, he made his own decision. He called over General Kambala, who was guarding the rear with him, and told him his worries. "General, there are mercenaries following us. If we don't get rid of them, trouble may come at any time." Standing in front of Zambala, Lu Duo spoke while using the torch beside him to observe the changes on his face. Both Lu Duo and Zambala were generals in the alliance. If it had to be said, the former was far less famous than the latter. If not for the fact that Fan Yuhai's warhorse had been killed and he had fallen down in a hurry and passed the command of the army to Lu Duo before he fainted, he would not have been able to ask this question. After hesitating for a moment, Zambala finally nodded his head. "All right, then I will lead the troops to cover the rear. But I want to take 10,000 cavalry with me." When it was Lu Duo's turn, he did not hesitate at all, as if he already knew that there would be such an outcome. Seeing Lu Duo agree so quickly, Zambala did not have anything to worry about. The mercenaries only had 10,000 men. With these 10,000 men, he naturally did not have anything to worry about. In the blink of an eye, Zambala had gathered the 10,000 cavalry that originally belonged to him. These were all the elite forces of the Mongol desert. With these, there was nothing to be afraid of. Zambala led the army and left. After Lu Duo sent them off, he turned to the army and said, "Let's go too." Then he rode his horse towards Fan Yuhai. Fan Yuhai, who was under the protection of a group of personal guards, was still lying in a carriage with his eyes closed. Even when the army left the city, there were still people who saw him. Everyone knew that General Fan had been attacked and fell off his horse. Naturally, they thought that he had been shot like Suda Khan. But when Lu Duo rode his horse over, the carriage's curtain was opened from the inside. Lu Duo's figure also entered the carriage. "General, are you all right?" After entering the carriage, Lu Duo asked with concern. "I'm fine. It's just a tooth. There's no problem." Fan Yuhai smiled confidently and then asked, "How are things?" "General, everything has been done according to your orders. You really have great foresight. The mercenaries really did chase over. I first sent General Qin, who was close to the Mongol army, out. As expected, he was not a match. Then Zambala brought 10,000 troops to cover the retreat." Lu Duo looked at Fan Yuhai with admiration as if he was looking at a god. The god of war was indeed admirable. He could always turn something rotten into something magical. But Lu Duo still thought that their general was not bad. He also had great foresight. If it wasn't for the fact that the general's starting point was too low and he couldn't make many decisions, if they really had the same number of troops, it would be hard to tell who would win. Just like now, the general was just taking advantage of the situation and beating them at their own game. This solved the biggest problem in front of them. One was General Qin, who had betrayed them. The other was General Zamubala, who was by Suda's side. As long as these two died, not only would their internal problems be solved, they would also have one less enemy. This would be a great help for them to take over the Mongol forces in the Gobi Desert. "And I'm not worried about you. Alright, go and inform Zhang Meng. Tell him to protect Suda Khan. At this time nothing can happen to him. Also, I heard that gunshot wounds are hard to treat. Is that true?" Fan Yuhai nodded calmly. He had used the opportunity of being ambushed to do this. It could be said that he had turned a bad thing into a good thing. In reality, he had never thought that he could rely on this alliance to defeat Yang Chendong. Or rather, in front of a strong force, he had never thought of doing anything to the mercenaries. Therefore, he had not tried his best in this battle. Everything was waiting. He believed that the god of war was not a normal person. He must have his own plans for appearing so suddenly. As expected, the facts had proven everything. The city was on fire and the army was in chaos. The east city gate was broken and the enemy had invaded the city. The series of attacks made Fan Yuhai speechless. At the same time, he used the opportunity to achieve his own military goals. This was the nature of a fierce and ruthless person. As long as it was beneficial to him, he would do it. As for emotions and allies, he could throw them all to the back of his mind. Only benefits were what he pursued and needed. Understood. Hearing Fan Yuhai say that gunshot wounds were hard to treat, Lu Duo understood that it would be very difficult for Khan Sade to recover. In the city, Yang Chendong followed the army into the city and saw the two captains Tai Hu and Baizhou waiting there. "You did a good job. I will record your achievements later." Yang Chendong knew that the ancient beheading operation was different from the modern one. The generals in the modern army usually did not have many guards around them. Even if they did, they would not follow them at every step. Unlike the generals in the modern army, they all had bodyguards protecting them. Some even had servants. When they went out, they would not leave their side at all. It was very difficult to take their head in the midst of tens of thousands of soldiers. It was already very good to be able to complete the mission. Excitement flashed across the faces of the two captains, but then Baizhou lowered his head and said with some shame, "Sixth young master, I personally went to carry out the operation against Fan Yuhai, but there were too many bodyguards around him. I did not wait for the right opportunity and only hit his horse, causing it to fall to the ground." Fan Yuhai was fine, which was something that Yang Chendong regretted. However, when he thought about how this person had been defeated by him more than once, and how the facts had proven that this person was not terrifying, he said magnanimously, "It's fine, this is his fate. Perhaps this is not a bad thing for us. But next time we won't be so lucky. And next time we definitely won't let him escape." After hearing the encouragement, Bai's was said with a very firm attitude. This time he had also hardened his heart and strived to achieve great merit when he had the chance. At this moment, one of Tiger's Mane's bodyguards came 5 meters in front of Yang Chendong, dismounted and saluted. "Sixth young master, our division commander led the army to pursue the enemy." Oh! Yang Chendong's eyes flashed. He could understand Tiger's Mane's feelings. After the previous defeat, he wanted to prove himself through a big battle. Now that the enemy had fled in panic, it was indeed a good opportunity to pursue. However, when he thought of Fan Yuhai's various methods, he was still a little worried. He looked at the captain of the 1st Guard Squad, Qiu Vi, and asked, "Have all the regiments reported their positions? Who is the closest to the independent division?" Reporting to the 6th young master, the 1st Regiment of Tatar Cavalry is killing the enemy outside the city. There is also the ferocious Tiger Regiment and the 1st and 2nd Regiments of Cavalry in the city. Good, immediately inform Commander Su He. Tell him to put down the matter at hand and use the fastest speed to chase after the independent division and provide support. Also, inform the ferocious Tiger Regiment and the 1st Regiment of Cavalry to follow us to the north. He knew that a thin camel was bigger than a horse. Once the Mongol tribes in the north stabilized their morale, the independent division would not be able to defeat them. Chapter 838. After the order was given, other than the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, the other regiments and battalions followed Yang Chendong to the north of the city. At this moment, 100 miles away from the north of the city, Tiger's Man's independent regiment had clashed with Kambala's 10,000 cavalry, and a huge battle had begun. When two armies met on a narrow path, the courageous would win. After the two armies unexpectedly met on the battlefield without the slightest bit of nonsense, the two sides fought together. Gunshots, shouts, and roars mixed together. No matter if it was Tiger's Man or Kambala, they were both very prideful people. Since they started fighting, they would not back down easily. Just like how a mountain could not contain two tigers, only one person could stand on the battlefield. First, a series of gunshots rang out, killing hundreds of enemies in the dark night, and the distance between the two sides was pulled closer. Withdrawing 6 battalions of musketeers, Tiger Brilliance led the other 8 battalions of cavalry to personally lead the charge, becoming the tip of an arrow as they charged towards the enemy formation. In the dark night, in order to see the situation around them clearly, both sides had no choice but to light up their torches. From afar, the battlefield looked like a walking fire dragon, majestic and shocking. In terms of military strength, Tiger's Edge was still at a disadvantage. He only had a little more than 3,000 men, but he had to fight with 10,000 cavalrymen. However, that didn't mean that he would lose. With his strong fighting spirit and the constant harassment from the 2,000 musketeers, he wouldn't show any signs of defeat in a short time. Both sides fought together, and from time to time, there would be warriors falling off their horses and dying. It was not the arrow that pierced into the Mongol cavalry and dealt them heavy damage, but it was the arrow that was completely surrounded by the enemy's forces, and in the end, when there was only one person left, all of them would die. The cruelty and mercilessness of the battlefield was vividly displayed at this moment. In less than an hour, both sides had paid a heavy price. Slowly, the advantage of the Mongol cavalry's numbers was revealed. This time, Kambala had brought elite cavalry. In terms of fighting ability and individual strength, they were only slightly weaker than the independent regiment. This could be made up for by the advantage in numbers. Luckily, when the independent regiment was struggling, the 1st Tatar Cavalry Regiment arrived. Regiment Commander Su He shouted, and fresh troops entered the battlefield. The addition of this new force caused the tilted battle platform to become more balanced. Seeing more and more mercenaries, Kambala's mood also changed. His mission was not to destroy the mercenaries behind him, but to block them and buy time for the main force to retreat. Now it seemed that more than 2 hours had passed and the sun was about to rise. His mission was complete. Even if he retreated now, no one could blame him. At this moment he was thinking about retreating. Umang seemed to have seen through Zamubala's thoughts. How could he be willing to give up? It was not easy for him to seize this opportunity. He would definitely not let the other party escape. After giving the order, the entanglement became even more intense. It was as if they were both in the same boat. As the battle continued, the disadvantage of the Mongol cavalry became more and more obvious. They were elites, but this battle was not to attack but to stop the enemy. It was the same as them using their lives in exchange for others to escape. It was impossible for them to not be angry. This kind of battle was not what everyone liked. If they won, they would only complete a military mission. If they lost, they might lose their lives. It was really not a good job. In the beginning, they had the advantage, so it wasn't a big deal. But now their advantage was getting smaller and smaller, and the sun was about to rise. Once the main force of the mercenaries caught up with them, wouldn't they all be wiped out here? Everyone was selfish. The cavalry who did not want to die started to find a chance to retreat. Facing the attacks of the mercenaries, they did not resist as fiercely as before. The morale of the troops was obviously shaken at this moment. As the main general, Kambala was naturally deeply affected. He could understand the mentality and situation of the soldiers, so he did not blame anyone. He steeled his heart and decided to abandon the 1,000 cavalry to stop the mercenaries while he led the main force to escape. He even had the thought of cutting off his own losses. But before he could think about it, a large number of torches appeared in the west and were quickly moving towards the battlefield. Just based on the direction, it should be the main force of the mercenaries. At this moment, he did not give Kambala any more time to think. He turned around and fled. As he retreated, he shouted for the other cavalry to retreat with him. The mercenaries' reinforcements had just appeared. If they escaped now, they still had a chance. But the moment they were surrounded, they would not be able to find a way out. Samubala decisively chose to retreat. He didn't even have the time to arrange who would cover his retreat. He wanted to seize every minute to escape. However, he also didn't think about who his opponent was this time. Even if Yang Chendong arrived with his troops, how could he let the fat meat in his hands escape? Long before he appeared, he had already arranged for the leader of the ferocious tiger regiment, Xiao Feng, to circle behind them and set up a formation. The predecessor of the ferocious tiger regiment was the Cold Vanguard regiment. The old soldiers were not only equipped with the 95 style, they were also equipped with 7 steel crossbows. No matter if it was close combat or long range, they could be called the king. With such an elite army placed there, how could you escape just because you wanted to? Kambala did not know this. But very quickly he realized that the situation was not right. The retreating army continued to fall on the path of the charge. The continuous firing of the muskets was like firecrackers being lit. It continued to ring out. Every time a bullet was fired, there would be a cavalry soldier falling off his horse. Stop the charge. Seeing the continuous casualties, Kambala finally knew that his path of retreat was cut off. Since that was the case, he turned his horse around and decided to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Compared to the unknown path ahead, it was better to turn back and fight the mercenaries head-on. If he was lucky, he might be able to kill his way out. Even if he was unlucky, he might be able to kill 2 more enemies. Kambala turned his head and launched a counterattack. His horse galloped forward. He had the idea of charging forward recklessly and fighting his way out. However, his luck was too bad. He met the 2 generals Tiger's Man and Su He head-on. 2 against 1, heart against heart. After clashing with 3 blades, Kambala's chest had a wound of about 40 centimeters. Fresh blood quickly flowed out from the wound. The strength in his body was also rapidly draining away. Just like that, a fierce general stepped into a dead end. General Kambala, surrender. Seeing the fatally wounded Kambala, Tiger's Man lowered his cavalry blade and said with a trace of admiration. Although they were enemies, the other party fought bravely. Just this point alone was worthy of his respect. A true Mongol cavalry does not surrender. Go and die. Summoning the last bit of strength in his body after a roar, Kambala continued to gallop forward. It was as if he wanted to perish together with Tiger's Man. The cavalry blade flashed. A blade to the throat. Tiger's Man firmly held onto the cavalry blade that was still dripping with blood. Beside him, Kambala's body trembled. Then with a plop he fell off the horse. His eyes were wide open, indicating the unwillingness in his heart when he died. However, if he knew that he was only used by Fan Yuhai and that his head was delivered to the hands of the mercenaries by his allies, he might not be able to close his eyes. Kambala died in battle and the sky began to brighten. The situation on the battlefield was so clear. Under the encirclement of cavalry and muskets, the Mongol cavalry finally put down the curved blades in their hands and knelt down to surrender. This battle was not bad. Seeing that at least 4,000 Mongol cavalry were captured, and they were the elite type, Yang Qindong revealed a gratified expression when he looked at Tiger's man. Before, he was really worried that after the last battle Tiger's man's fighting spirit would be shaken and he would be afraid. Or if that was the case, he could only keep this person by his side and do some things that he could do. Fortunately, he did not disappoint him and his might did not decrease. After being praised by Yang Qindong, Tiger's man's tiredness immediately disappeared. He opened his mouth and laughed. With these words, everything was worth it. Okay, the independent division will stay and clean up the battlefield. The other regiments will follow me back to Wanda City. There is still a big battle waiting for us. Yang Qindong stretched out his hand and patted Tiger's man's shoulder. He turned around and shouted to the other regimental commanders who had gathered. While he was on his way to help Tiger's man, the 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment had sent news that they had surrounded Agadorji and his 10,000 men in Guangwu City, which was not far from Wanda City. This news almost didn't make Yang Qindong turn around. He knew that rice had to be eaten one bite at a time. In the end, he decided to help the independent division solve the problem first before going to Guangwu City to help. Considering that he only had one regiment and it was not a full regiment, he was afraid of losing the situation. He also ordered Luge's 2nd Cavalry Regiment, who was cleaning up the battlefield in Wanda City, to send a battalion to help. He also arranged for the reconnaissance battalion Su Yunxing to bring reinforcements. Now that the matter here was finally solved, it was time to go to Guangwu City to take a look. To tell the truth, this time's decision was somewhat beyond his expectations. Before the battle, he had only given orders to the regimental commanders to act according to the circumstances. He did not expect that his regiment could actually blast 10,000 enemies into Guangwu City. Speaking of which, this decision was not a coincidence, but a manifestation of his own superior wisdom. After receiving the military order, he took the 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment, which only had 2,000 men, into Wanda City. He sent people to inquire about the situation in the city. With the help of the reconnaissance battalion, he learned that Agadorji had left through the west gate. He also learned that this person had been shot in the shoulder and was afraid that he would not be able to move quickly. After that, a bold idea was born in his mind. Chapter 839. After Shoubai gave the order, a rumor spread that Sud Khan and Fan Yuhai had been ambushed and their lives were in danger. Many of the Mongol soldiers had already surrendered to the mercenaries. At the same time, he ordered his soldiers to hold 4 torches each and chase after the Tatar army under the cover of the night. As soon as the rumor spread, the scout at the rear reported it to Agar Dorji, who was fleeing in the carriage. The gunshot wound on his shoulder was no longer bleeding, but the bullet had not been removed. Every time he moved he would feel excruciating pain. But when he heard that Sud Khan and Fan Yuhai were in trouble, he could not help but laugh to the sky. Ha ha, good, very good, they are in a worse situation than me. There was a saying that when you were down on your luck, all you needed to do was to find someone who was even more unlucky than you. Then your mental state would immediately be balanced. Agar Dorji, who was laughing, had an ugly expression on his face. He was worried about his situation, especially when he heard from his subordinates that there were mercenaries chasing after him. They didn't know how many of them there were, but they estimated that there were about 7,000 to 8,000 of them based on the number of torches. Agar Dorji's expression became even more bitter as he thought that the main force of the mercenaries was targeting him. At this time, the army was just passing by Guangwu town, which had been occupied by the Allied army. Seeing the city in front of him, he did not want to be ambushed by the mercenaries. He ordered his soldiers to enter the city and use the city as a base to defend. When the army entered the city, the 4 gates were quickly closed. Only then did Shoubai feel relieved. If the enemy did not pay attention to him, then with his 2,000 men he would not be able to stop the army and create enough time for the main force to surround the town. Now that they had entered the city, they were like turtles in a jar at the mercy of the mercenaries. The sky gradually brightened, and a battalion of the 2nd Regiment of Reinforced Cavalry and the main force of the Reconnaissance Battalion arrived at Guangwu town, cutting off the enemy's escape route. The Tatar cavalry, who had been running for most of the night, were now guarding the city. Although there were not many mercenaries surrounding the city, they did not intend to rush out of the city. In their view, with the protection of the city, It was much better than being surrounded on all sides of the grassland. In the morning, Yang Qindong and the main force of the mercenaries finally arrived at Guangwu town. When he saw that the city was completely surrounded, the sixth young master's face revealed a smile. Good, this time Shoubai has done a great service. Sixth young master, you flatter me. It's just a little trick. Shoubai did not dare to claim the credit. Haha, it would be great if every general had this kind of little. Yang Qindong was still chuckling. He then patted Shoubai's shoulder, full of appreciation. Previously, Shoubai had suddenly been promoted from a fallen general to a regiment commander. During this time he had not made a single contribution, only following Yang Qindong to the capital. This had caused the dissatisfaction of many people, but no one dared to challenge the authority of the sixth young master. Now reality had given those people a slap in the face. At this time, Yang Qindong had openly said that if other officers had this kind of ability, they would also be promoted and placed in important positions. There were many brave and fierce generals in the mercenary army, but there were too few people who could hold their own. And those who had this kind of ability were now division commanders. The other regimental commanders were brave in battle, but they lacked the necessary tempering. With this order, the mercenary army surrounded Guangwu so tightly that not even a drop of water could pass through. Any other army would have been waiting for the Tatar army to break out of the encirclement or for them to surrender when they ran out of provisions. It was just a town, and without any preparations, there was no way it could support an army of 15,000 soldiers. But in Yang Qindong's eyes, he wasn't willing to wait any longer. 2 mortars were pulled to the foot of the city wall. Every 8 hours, 2 shells would be fired at the defeated Tatar army. These aimless shells seemed to fall anywhere. As they crashed into Guangwu town, the Tatar soldiers began to scream in pain. They lacked food and clothing, had no future, and could fall at any moment. How long could they last? In the impenetrable encirclement of Guangwu town, which had no water source, after just 4 days, some people began to drink from the snow on the streets and roofs. But the weather was getting warmer and there was not enough snow, so the situation became even clearer. 7 days later, after being shot, lacking medicine, and having Hilaro's corpse hung outside the city, the chaotic King Agadorji died in a fit of rage. Like a dragon without a head, it opened the door and surrendered. Without wasting a single soldier, the 15,000 Tatar cavalrymen surrendered, and the mercenaries returned to the first city with the might of a great victory. This battle lasted for a total of 11 days. The shattering Meng army, injuring Sud, killing Agadorji, and the mercenary army returned to the city. In the beginning of spring, the grass began to sprout and the willow trees were green. A new wave of construction in the city had begun. Under the planned step-by-step work, Sure City appeared in front of the world with a small change a day and a big change a few days later. Trees that took a lot of effort to move from hundreds of miles away were planted inside and outside the city to resist the wind and sand. The people of Sure City felt like they were in a different world. The changes in the army also began. Among the 20,000 prisoners, warriors were constantly selected to supplement the various divisions. It seemed like the Duke of Loyalty was not satisfied with this change. He immediately sent a telegram to the political department of Xianxia City, and the army building operation officially began. The commander of the First Army on the Sea was decided, and as expected it was Zhou Xian. A shining golden badge was worn on his body, and the order to promote him to Major General was given. The new army on the land, the choice of commander was out of everyone's expectations, but everything was within reason. The commander, Tiger's Mane, was not the Lung Song that everyone had imagined. The moment the order was given, Lung Song closed the door in the Lung residence in Xianxia City and did not see anyone. He did not even appear in front of the military department. This situation lasted for 3 days and Yang Wu came. The door was opened and no one dared to stop him. Although Yang Wu was from the Yang family's Yang family, he had an extraordinary transcendent status in Crimson Nest City. As for him, he didn't even have a fixed official position, but he could meddle in and ask about anything. Lung Song, who closed the door to visitors, could not give face to anyone in Xianxia City, but he could not avoid Yang Wu. The moment the door was opened, Lung Song, who was dressed in civilian clothes, sat in the main hall and welcomed guests. In the main hall, Yang Wu's expression was calm, especially when he saw that Lung Song was not wearing the uniform that matched his status. Instead he was wearing civilian clothes. He shook his head gently. Commander Ling, are you going to retire from active service? If it was any other time, the weight of this sentence could be imagined. He would have been in fear and trepidation, but at this moment he smiled bitterly and said, I'm afraid I can't wear it even if I want to. Brother Yongwu, don't you think so? Who said this? Please tell me. Yongwu will charge him with the crime of spreading rumors and creating trouble. Then I'll arrest him and interrogate him. Yongwu said unhurriedly. Then he found a chair and sat down. In the Ling residence, Yongwu rarely came. After all, he was one of the young master's people and had to avoid suspicion. However, he did not come to the residence often. Usually the two had a good relationship. After all, Yongwu had a great reputation in Xichen City and had a deep relationship with Leng Feng's first division. Is there a need for others to say this? Although Leng Song is slow-witted, he can still understand some things. Leng Song still did not raise his head as he replied. His entire body exuded a decadent aura as if he had aged a lot. Oh, so it turns out that some people thought they were smart, hee. Yongwu chuckled, then shook his head as if he didn't dare to agree. Hearing Yongwu's mocking words, Leng Song raised his head with a puzzled expression. He thought to himself, did I think wrong? Seeing Leng Song's puzzled expression, Yongwu shook his head. It was the young master's idea to not promote Leng Song's position this time. Leng Song's name was also not mentioned in the 5-man investigation. It was still the young master's idea. In the end, this was just a warning. Leng Song's dissatisfaction with the Army's 1st Division's performance in the incident with Yang Taizhu and Chen Shuquan was also a warning. He originally thought that some people would be brave after being humiliated, but now it seemed that the pressure was too great. It was so great that some people felt like they could not breathe and wanted to give up. This was especially so when Leng Song saw that there was no hope of promotion and adopted a passive approach. When the news reached Yang Qindong's ears through a telegram, it was not hard to say whether he was disappointed or not. It was often said that the greater a person's mental endurance, the greater their achievements. Just from this sentence alone, it was clear that Leng Song's performance was not good. Yang Qindong even wanted to give up on this person. He had raised Leng Song with one hand, so of course he could suppress him with one hand. However, at this time the future 6th Madame Wan Xiaoyu suddenly sent a telegram. She was actually pleading for Leng Song. The telegram did not have many words, the meaning was simple and clear. Everyone would make mistakes, Leng Song was just temporarily blinded by fame and fortune. In reality his character was not bad. In Yang Tieju's case, it was already proven that he was not involved. In the investigation, there was also no evidence that he had made any mistakes. His mistake was that he had been too proactive in this period of time. His mistake was that he had contacted some people he should not have contacted wanting to be promoted. Leng Song thought that if more people were willing to speak up for him, he would be able to firmly wear the title of Army Commander and Major General. However, he did not think about who gave him everything in Crimson City. If that person did not nod, what was the point of letting 1,000 people speak up? Chapter 840. Wan Xiaoyu's telegram changed Yang Qindong's decision in the end. Since this person had been by his side for a long time and had always performed well in the past, he finally forgave him. Thus, Yang Wu's current actions came about. Seeing that Leng Song was in such a state, it was useless to rely on words to advise him. Yang Wu sighed softly and decided to help him to the end. He would properly enlighten him and explain things to him. Of course, he would only do this once and only once. If Leng Song still did not know when to back down after this incident, then he would really have to give up. Division Commander Leng, the young master still has hope for you. After a moment of silence in the hall, Yang Wu finally spoke. Just this sentence alone made Leng Song's eyes light up. He raised his head and stared at Yang Wu. He knew that this person would definitely have something to say. Sure enough, Yang Wu did not stop and continued. Division Commander Leng's performance was indeed not very good a while ago, especially when you found a lot of people to speak for you. Your thoughts may not be wrong, but your actions were not wise. Don't you know that the people you're looking for, everything they have was given to them by young master? Their identities, including yours and mine, can be taken back at any time as long as the young master is willing? I did not mean to pressure him. I just... Leng Song anxiously explained. All right, Division Commander Leng does not need to explain to me. There is also no need for this because the young master has never cared. Otherwise, I would not be saying this to you now. However, there are some things that you can do once but absolutely cannot do a second time. Otherwise, even if Division Commander Luan pleads for you, I'm afraid it will be useless. This sentence revealed a bit of information. After digesting it, Leng Song's eyes widened. 1. Division Commander Luan pleads for me? The so-called Division Commander Luan was naturally Luan Xiaoyu. However, it was precisely because of this that Leng Song's face was filled with disbelief. Be it in public or private, the relationship between the two was very ordinary. Except for the necessary contact at work, there was no personal relationship. There were even many times when Luan Xiaoyu's attitude towards Leng Song could be described as cold. Leng Song did not expect that the sixth madam would plead for him under such a relationship. However, these words came from Yang Wu's mouth, and they were so true that no one could doubt them. When Yang Wu saw Leng Song's surprised gaze, he sighed again in his heart. The word benefit was indeed very powerful. Usually, Leng Song was calm and orderly when he did things, as if he had the demeanor of a great general. However, when it came to his official career, he was unable to remain calm. Yang Wu didn't want to explain anything. Commander Leng, think about it carefully. What do you have to complain about? Do you know who Hu Tu is? That's the person who's been with the young master the longest. Isn't it legitimate for him to become a commander before you? Zai, did you not hear the order of the political department? Hu Tu is the commander of the new army, and Gao Xiong is the commander of the 1st Marine Army. Leng Song was puzzled at first, but it didn't take long before his expression began to change. They were both commanders, and since there was the 1st Sea Army, then the ground army should also be the 1st Land Army, but why was it the 1st Army of the ground army? This didn't seem to make sense. The surprise on his face became more and more intense. Yang Wu had already stood up. Commander Leng, you can choose for yourself where to go. By the way, you don't have to thank the 6th madam. As long as you work hard, that will be the greatest gratitude. Yes, this is what the 6th madam said herself. After saying this, Yang Wu did not wait for Leng Song to speak again. He had already stood up and left, leaving behind a graceful and elegant background. Leng Song did not send him off. Instead, he sat on the chair and pondered for a long time. No one knew what the result would be except for himself. However, early the next morning, Leng Song reported to the military headquarters in his military uniform. Everything was back on track again. If there was any change, it would be that he worked harder and was more self-disciplined than before. In Crimson City, Yang Qindong reported Leng Song's recent changes through a telegram. After reading it, he sent the telegram back to Beta Persei. It's not hopeless. Young master, you must not be angry for others. Beta Persei, who knew about this matter, took the initiative to lead the conversation in another direction after comforting him. Young master, Hu Tu is getting more and more depressed. The people below are very afraid of him. Yes, Tiger's mane has indeed changed a lot. However, this is not a bad thing. When a person's position is high, he understands that it's lonely at the top. Naturally, he can't be like before. Yang Qindong nodded. Ever since Tiger's mane was promoted to the commander of the new army, he had indeed changed a lot. In short, he smiled less, spoke less, and looked more depressed. Of course, it could also be said that he had become more mature. In less than half a year, he had been promoted from the leader of a regiment to the commander of an army. Could be said that he had been promoted on the front lines. During this time, he had been proud, lost and won battles until now he had slowly become more mature. Could be said that all of this was forced. The culprit was Yang Qindong himself. The incident between Yang Taizhu and Qin Shuquan was a wake-up call for him. If it was not for Yu Mian's accidental appearance, the problem would not have been exposed. He could not even imagine the extent of the destruction. Now that he looked back at the cause and effect of the incident, these two people were guilty, but what about the others in Crimson City? Including himself, did he not have any responsibility at all? At the same time that he gave others power, he did not teach them how to use this power well, nor did he have enough supervision measures. It was fine if there was no problem with this kind of power, but once there was a problem, it would be a big problem that might involve himself. After the previous experience, Yang Qindong would undoubtedly be more careful when using people. This time he did not promote Leng Song to the position of commander, but instead promoted Tiger's Mane by 1 rank. Of course, through this matter, Yang Qindong was also telling the officials in Crimson City that there were some things that only he could decide. What should be given to you will be given to you. If you didn't want to, no matter how hard you tried or how many people you secretly gathered, it would be useless. At the very least, before Xianxia was completely strong, this rule would not be changed. Yang Qindong thought in his heart. Speaking of Tiger's Mane, he had followed him since he was young, and was the one who would not go against his will the least. This kind of person with experience and ability, why couldn't he be promoted to commander first? It was just that with Yang Qindong's actions, the one who suffered was Tiger's Mane. He felt an enormous pressure. Especially for him who had just suffered a huge defeat, the pressure was even greater. At the same time that he carried the heavy responsibility, the pressure came with it. All the changes in Tiger's Mane were within Yang Qindong's expectations. But at the same time, this kind of change was delightful because it proved his growth, proved that Tiger's Mane was moving from an intermediate officer to a senior officer. As long as he could get through this, it would be much smoother for him when he did things in the future. Let's go and take a look at the new army. Yang Qindong stood up. Since he had chosen to put the heavy responsibility on Tiger's Mane, he naturally wouldn't just move his mouth. When it was time to put in effort, he would put in effort. The new army's barracks were still the same as the old barracks 10 miles outside the city. The only difference was that they had heavier responsibilities. Since it was called an army, there would naturally be divisions under it. The new army had 3 divisions, 3 regiments and 1 battalion. The 3 divisions were the Independent Division, the Tatar Division and the Recruit Division, led by Xin Honghai, Su He and Lu Zhua. Tiger's Mane was the commander and Shibi was the deputy commander. The 3 regiments were the Heavy Cavalry Regiment Commander Zhui Feng, the Light Cavalry Regiment Commander Ma Xiangshan, the Direct Cavalry Regiment Commander Deng Yu, and the Reconnaissance Battalion Commander Ding Shan. Among them, the divisions had 15 battalions plus 1 direct cavalry regiment, totaling 6,100 people. The regiments had 5 battalions, totaling 2,000 people. The Reconnaissance Battalion had 5 companies, totaling 500 people. The 3 divisions, 3 regiments and 1 battalion had a total of 24,800 people. On the surface, other than Wind-Chasing Wolf, everyone had been promoted, especially Shibi, who had soared to the sky in 1 step. He had been promoted from the regimental commander to the deputy commander. That was a big step. But in fact, Wind-Chasing Wolf was leading a heavy cavalry regiment. Although there were only 2,000 people, which was not as good as before, they were the elites of the elites. They were equipped with the most advanced armor and had several times more combat power than their actual number. To put it this way, if they didn't use firearms and only charged at the other party on the grassland, even a division wouldn't be able to do anything to them. On the contrary, there was a high chance that they would be defeated. It was precisely because he had the strongest warhorse, the best armor, and the most elite warriors that Wind-Chasing Wolf was still very happy even though he didn't get promoted this time. This was the cavalry team he had asked for before. Could be said that he had asked for benevolence and got benevolence. The establishment of the new army had basically digested all the fruits of victory from the previous battle in Wandu City. Now, other than the new army, only the Logistics Regiment led by Beta Persei and the Fierce Tiger Regiment led by Xiao Feng were left in the first city. After handing over the matter of improving the military quality of the army and patrolling the surrounding areas to Tiger's Mane, Yang Qindong focused his energy on the construction of the city. There was no doubt that the first city would bear a very important position in the future and would even become an important symbol of the mercenary army. The planning and construction of the city were the most important problems. There were many things that even Yu Mian himself couldn't do. It was only the 6th young master who did it personally. Just as Yang Qindong's attention shifted from the war to the construction of the first city, the Ming army in Tulu City, which was 800 miles away, finally began to move. Chapter 841. Spring had arrived. The ice and snow had melted, revealing the green grassland. The grassland was full of life. At the same time, it also represented the beginning of the war. Without the shackles of snow, the grazing season was about to arrive. Resources became the most important thing in everyone's eyes. How to have a better performance and change in the new year became a problem that everyone had to consider. As the commander of the Wanquan Metropolitan Department, Shi Wanshan's days in the Xian mansion had been very comfortable recently. Unlike Sun Hong, who faced the Walla's leader Yeshen and had a lot of pressure, the Xian mansion, which bordered the mercenary forces, had good politics and people. The hearts of the soldiers and the people were very stable. Not only that, but the memorials sent to the capital during the new year also indicated that the imperial court had allocated 500,000 taels of silver, allowing them to build 50,000 new soldiers. With money it was easy to do things. Shi Wanshan's ambition grew. He only had 20,000 soldiers now. If he could have 50,000 more, his strength would increase by more than one level. Since the imperial court had agreed, he immediately took action. First, he recruited soldiers in the Xian mansion. Soon, 30,000 new soldiers were in place. However, he was still not satisfied. In his opinion, the best source of soldiers was the Mongols. Not only were their bodies stronger than the Han people, their equestrian skills were better. And the most important advantage was that there was no need to worry about using these people. Even if they died on the battlefield, the compensation given would be very low. Most people could even not give it at all. He had sent people to inquire and found that many Mongol soldiers had been recruited in the beginning city. Among them there were Walla soldiers, Tatar soldiers, Mongol soldiers and Nuzan soldiers. Moreover, the scouts he sent out to inquire reported that the number of soldiers in the beginning city was unimaginable. Countless people cried and shouted that they wanted to join the mercenary army, but they had no way to do so. This news greatly boosted Shi Wanshan's spirit. He saw an example and decided to follow suit and use the same method of recruitment. The master of the beginning city was just a loyal duke appointed by Baiming. Then if he recruited soldiers in the name of Baiming, wouldn't he be more popular? Thus, at the beginning of spring, there was an additional recruitment office under the city of Tulu, responsible for welcoming the warriors and men of the grasslands. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was often cruel. The recruitment office had been set up for nearly a month, but the number of Mongolians who had actually signed up for the army was few and far between. All in all, there were no more than 50 people and most of them were weak men. It was impossible for Shi Wanshan to see the recruitment office filled to the brim with people fighting to enlist. Shi Wanshan was a smart person. He quickly found the reason. Only then did he realize that the reason why the beginning city could easily recruit soldiers was because of the reputation of the war god of loyalty. The mercenaries had relied on their fists to forcefully conquer a piece of the world and become known to the world. After figuring this out, he naturally wouldn't be convinced. He quickly got his two deputies, Ancient River and Ning Wenfeng, to discuss the matter of sending troops to Mount Saihan. As a part of the Tatars, Mount Saihan was placed here by the great Khan Tuochuo Buhua to block the path of the great Ming dynasty. However, this huge rock gradually lost its effect after the sudden appearance of the beginning city and the capture of Tulu city. Shi Wanshan didn't know why the Duke of Loyalty didn't take action to remove this nail. However, even if the Duke of Loyalty didn't do it, it didn't mean that he would. Especially now that Tulu city had fallen into the hands of Baiming, the threat of this place was already close at hand. By sending troops to Mount Saihan, they could make a name for themselves and let the warriors of the grasslands know that there was not only the beginning city, but also Baiming's army. In addition, by occupying this place, it was equivalent to having one more front station for Baiming to send troops to intervene in the grasslands in the future. Do we need to report this matter to the beginning city? Ning Wenfeng, who was the commander and was also Shi Wanshan's think tank military advisor, asked. No need. With our strength we can take down Mount Saihan by ourselves. Shi Wanshan shook his head. In his opinion, perhaps this action wouldn't make the Duke of Loyalty happy. Once he was notified, what if he didn't agree? What should he do then? Seeing that Shi Wanshan had made up his mind, the commander, Ancient River, who was sitting at the side, stood up and said, All right, since that's the case, I'll lead the troops to fight. 3 days later, 15,000 Baiming soldiers set off from Tulu city toward Mount Saihan, which was 400 miles away. Among them, 5,000 were new recruits. On the city wall, as the guarding eunuch Deng Chong watched as Ancient River, who was dressed in armor, led the troops away, he spoke in a hoarse voice. Commander Shi, I can fill in the memorials for the expedition later, but we must win this battle. Otherwise, I'm afraid that there will be people in the imperial court who will cause trouble for us. Don't worry, eunuch Deng. With General Ancient River leading the troops, there will only be 8,000 enemies on Mount Saihan. There won't be any mistakes. Shi Wanshan looked confident. From all the information he had gathered, this battle wasn't going to be difficult. However, after 5 days, a letter requesting reinforcements was sent back to Commander Shi in Tulu City. The letter was personally written by General Ancient River. When he arrived at the foot of the mountain, he prepared to attack the city. However, on the 3rd day when the army launched their attack, they were blocked at the Black Stone Slope. Relying on the advantageous terrain, the Tatar army continuously counterattacked. After charging again and again, 4,000 soldiers died in battle, but they still didn't achieve any results. Not only that, but the 5,000 new recruits were also heard by the army. No matter what orders were given, they weren't willing to charge together with the old soldiers. Seeing that there were only 6,000 men left, Ancient River had no choice but to ask for reinforcements. In the past, all the information said that the Mongol army was useless. When faced with the attacks of the mercenaries, they were often quickly defeated and showed signs of defeat. This made Shi Wanshan think that the Mongol cavalry had also fallen and that their combat strength was not as good as before. However, now that they had actually fought, he knew that it wasn't that the Mongol army had fallen back, but that the mercenaries were too strong. However, since things had come to this, there was no turning back. At this moment, there was no possibility of stopping and retreating. If he really did that, the morale of the army would definitely be shaken, and the recruitment of new soldiers would naturally be unable to continue. Send the troops. This time I will personally take action. I will lead 5,000 soldiers. Shi Wanshan decisively made a decision. He ordered Ning Wenfeng and eunuch Deng Chong to stay behind in Tulu City. He personally led 5,000 old soldiers to Mount Saihan. In the beginning city, Yang Chendong had already received the news the moment the army in Tulu City began to mobilize. Shi Wanshan, who thought that he was smart, closed the 4 gates and didn't allow anyone to leave the city. However, he didn't know that there was something called a telegram. People didn't need to leave the city to send the news to very far places. After receiving the news, Yang Chendong quickly saw through Shi Wanshan's motive. To the south was the territory of Datong Prefecture. There was an old rival of Baiming Yeshen. If they begged him not to harass them, they would be very lucky. Then they would definitely not find trouble with him. The beginning city was very powerful, and it wasn't something that Shi Wanshan could easily touch. After thinking about it, it seemed that there was only Mount Saihan left. Speaking of Mount Saihan, they had also fought with the mercenaries before. They had launched a sneak attack, but they didn't gain any advantage. Yang Chendong originally wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. However, after the scout reported the terrain there, he stopped this plan. Now was the time to develop the beginning city. It was just a poor mountain. It didn't matter whether they occupied it or not. Even if they occupied it, they still had to send people to guard it. Without that place, it meant that there was no buffer between him and Baiming. Yang Chendong, who had always looked at the big picture, let them go. He didn't expect Shi Wanshan to have designs on them. Well, since he wanted to hit a rock, he might as well do it. When the time came, both sides would suffer. Wouldn't that be more beneficial to him? After receiving the news, Yang Chendong didn't take this matter seriously. In fact, he had already thought about the outcome. On this day, he was attending the opening ceremony of the newly built Yang Family Academy in the beginning city. After a few months of hard work, an academy with a height of 4 stories and an area of more than 100 acres was built. Yang Chendong was the president, and Wang Si was the first vice president. They were in charge of the main matters of the academy. The academy opened up the main subjects such as mathematics, language, physics, science, medicine, and other subjects. There were also other subjects such as sports, music, art, and even foreign language classes. Although they were only teaching some Mongolian, Russian, Japanese, and Korean for now. However, it wouldn't be long before some Western languages would be developed. At that time, there would be a group of foreign language talents here. This would play a great role in future dealings with countries around the world and even in occupying them. Because of Yang Chendong's participation, the ceremony became very lively. The 500 students of the academy for the first time were all present. And this was only the first batch. In the future, there would be more people who would enter to learn. After learning, they would be used by Xianxia. Just after the ceremony was completed, and under the accompaniment of Wang Si, the vice president, he was walking around the academy. The commander of the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yunsheng, appeared and gestured to Beta Persei from afar. Soon after, an urgent report was sent to Yang Chendong. Glancing at the contents of the report, Yang Chendong's eyes paused for a moment. Then he said to Wang Si, who was accompanying him, "Dean Wang, please take care of the matters here. This young master still has something to do, so I'll go first. Tiger Army Commander, come with me." After hurriedly leaving the academy, Yang Chendong returned to the war room in the Yang residence. Tiger Mane quickly came over. The report that had just been sent was also sent to him. After reading the contents, Tiger Mane's face flashed with surprise. After thinking for a moment, he looked at Yang Chendong and said, "Young master, leave this matter to the new army." "Hey, what do you think?" Yang Chendong nodded lightly. The war naturally had to be left to the new army. Unless the situation was serious, he would only bring the Tiger Army. Chapter 842, Tatar Cavalry's Spring Hunt. Chapter 842. At this moment, Zhou Xian had already arrived at the foot of Mount Saihan with 5,000 reinforcements. Not only that, he had already launched 2 attacks. Under the ferocious attacks of the reinforcements, they had already taken over half of the magnetite slope. The dawn of victory was right in front of them. Report. A scout on a fast horse suddenly appeared in front of the Baiming army's tent. Then the cavalryman, who was sweating profusely, jumped off his horse and knelt on the ground. "Commander, a large number of Tatar cavalrymen suddenly appeared 50 miles behind us. They are heading straight for us." "Behind us?" Zhou Xian's face turned cold when he heard the report. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Ancient River, who was standing at the side, was also shocked. "What's going on? Are you sure it's the Tatar cavalrymen? Where did they come from? How many of them are there?" "We don't know where they came from, but there should be around 40,000 of them." The scout raised his head and then lowered it again, reporting what he knew. "Retreat, continue scouting." When he heard that there were 40,000 enemy cavalrymen, Zhou Xian could no longer remain calm. After the scout retreated, he glanced sideways at Gu He, who was at the side, with a strong intention to ask. "Let's retreat. Let's retreat to Tulu City first. Maybe they aren't coming for us." At this moment, Ancient River didn't have any better suggestions. He could only say this with a fluke mentality. "Okay, prepare to retreat immediately. We don't have much time left." It was only 50 miles away. The cavalrymen would arrive in the blink of an eye. It didn't matter if these people were coming for them or not. For safety's sake, it was better to avoid conflict. The Baiming army, who was still attacking fiercely, suddenly stopped attacking the mountain. Then they began to prepare to retreat. In order to speed things up, they even decided to abandon some of the less important supplies. Within an hour, 2,000 men of the vanguard were sent out. On Mount Saihan, the Baiming army suddenly stopped their fierce attacks, causing the Tatar generals Mazam and Bela to be puzzled. They were afraid that the Baiming army had a plan, so they didn't dare to act rashly. It wasn't until a gerfalcon suddenly flew over the mountain and was captured by a trainer that they learned what had happened at the foot of the mountain. "Ha!" Mazam laughed heartily when he read the report and passed it to Bora. "Take a look, it's General Hubo. He's leading 40,000 cavalrymen towards Mount Saihan. I'm sure the Baiming army is rushing back to Tulu after hearing the news." After reading the report, Bai La's face was also filled with excitement. "General, this means that our chance has come. Does the Baiming army want to escape? Humph. After fighting us for so long, how can they just leave like that? Why don't we keep them busy and buy time for General Hubo to arrive? Then we can pincer them and wipe them out." "All right. However, we still have to be careful of the mercenaries in the origin city. How about this? We'll leave 2,000 men behind and take 4,000 down the mountain," Mazam suggested. Bora nodded in agreement and led the 4,000 cavalrymen down the mountain, leaving 2,000 soldiers behind. After fighting with the Baiming army for several days, they had lost 2,000 men. The remaining 2,000 were their final strength. Zhou Xian didn't know that he had been targeted. He also didn't know that the Tatar army's original target was them. The 40,000 cavalrymen led by Hubo were one of the great Khan Tuachuo Buwa's subordinates. They took advantage of the warmth of spring and the blooming of flowers to appear in the grasslands. They also had a unique name, the Spring Hunt. When spring arrived, the cavalrymen would go out to show off their strength and show off their strength. They would also show off their strength and show off what territory belonged to them. These places were sacred and could not be invaded. Otherwise, they would have to be prepared to be attacked by the cavalrymen. Unfortunately, the territory that Hubo had chosen to patrol this year was near Saihan Mountain. The appearance of the origin city and the change of Talu city had made the Tatar army feel threatened. This time it was time for them to take back what originally belonged to them. Previously it was mostly Walla and Baiming fighting. Previously, the Great Ming dynasty had attacked the Mongol tribes, and Walla had not had any major conflicts with the Great Ming dynasty. However, Yang Qindong's appearance had broken this situation. They needed to retaliate to show off their position and sovereignty. It was under such circumstances that Hubo led his 40,000 cavalrymen into the grasslands. Along the way, the scouts at the front had sent news that when the Baiming army was attacking Saihan Mountain, Hubo had led his army over. They wanted to start with the Baiming army that dared to cross the line. As the army headed down Mount Saihan, in the middle of the troops, Hubo received news that the North Ming army was making a move and wanted to retreat. A vicious look flashed across his face. You want to retreat? It's too late. Where's General Gar? I'll give you 5,000 cavalrymen. Set off first and stop the Baiming army from retreating to Talu city. The main army will follow soon. Understood. A Mongolian general dressed in armor cupped his fists in acknowledgement, then galloped out on his horse. Not long after, he gathered 5,000 cavalrymen and sped down Mount Saihan. Hubo did not even look at the cavalrymen. With 5,000 cavalrymen paving the way, he was confident that the Baiming army would not be able to escape. At this moment, while hurrying, he said to Mu Ren beside him, General Mu, continue to tell me about the war god. Mu Ren originally belonged to the Tatar faction. Previously, when the Mongol tribe wanted to surround the city, he saw that the situation was not good and immediately escaped. He met up with General Chiga of Guangwu town and left the region together. There were mercenaries in front and the Mongol army in the north. Under such circumstances, they were weak and could only give up on defending this place. They wanted to go to the south to find Tuoa to work for the Great Khan. However, they did not expect to meet Hubo, who had come for the spring hunt. Both sides gathered together and their army reached 50,000. Since Hubo had asked, Mu Ren naturally had to answer. Yes, General. Speaking of this war god, he is indeed very famous. In this region, everyone who hears his name trembles in fear. After he changed Arakumaki to the first city, he defeated Agar Dorji's 50,000 soldiers and the 20,000 soldiers of the Mongol tribe in the north of the desert. Not to mention the changes in Hubo's heart after hearing Mu Ren's words. Just the sudden appearance of 40,000 Mongol cavalrymen in Talu city, and according to the scouts, there were 10,000 soldiers following behind them. When Ning Wenfeng heard this, he immediately felt the severity of the situation. The Wan Quan Metropolitan Division had 20,000 old soldiers. Previously, General Ancient River had taken 10,000 with him. Later, General Shi Wanshan took another 5,000. Now he only had 5,000 soldiers left, of which 2,000 were in charge of training the new soldiers in the Xian manner. He only had 3,000 old soldiers. With 3,000 Mongol cavalrymen, 40,000 cavalrymen and 10,000 infantry, it was impossible. The best thing to do now was to defend the city, but whether or not they could do it was another matter. However, this Commander Qian Shi unexpectedly made an unexpected decision. That was, he wanted to go out of the city to rescue and welcome back Commander Shi Wanshan. Perhaps in other people's eyes, once something happened to the commander and commander comrade, Qian Shi would be able to smoothly take over the position. However, in the eyes of the smart Ning Wenfeng, this was not the case. If it was peacetime, he might use his brain. However, with the Mongol army at the border, he would not use his brain. If he wanted to stabilize the situation, the Wan Quan Metropolitan Division and the Xian Manor could not do without Shi Wanshan. After making the decision to go out of the city, Ning Wenfeng only left behind 1,000 old soldiers to defend the city. At the same time, he sent someone to inform Deng Chong to send another 1,000 old soldiers and 10,000 new soldiers to defend Talu city. Then he opened the city gates and left. The situation was very critical. Shi Wanshan, who had left behind a lot of supplies, wanted to immediately retreat to Talu city. At that time he would still have a chance to defend the city. He moved quickly, but the Mongol army was not slow either. Soon he received news that the 2,000 cavalrymen in the vanguard had been defeated and were retreating. The scouts said that the Mongol army's General Gaur had defeated our vanguard with 5,000 cavalrymen and is on his way here. There's even worse news. Behind us, General Mazam of Mount Saihan is also chasing us with 4,000 cavalrymen. What should we do? Guhi asked Gu Wanshan anxiously. Clearly the current situation was far worse than they had imagined. Let's go. Guhi said anxiously. Kill. Carve out a path of blood. Let's return to Talu City before the enemy completely encircles us. Perhaps at this time, when Feng has already brought people over to us. Shi Wanshan replied after a short moment of silence. General Ning? Ancient River's eyes were filled with doubt. There's no doubt about it. Wenfeng sees the big picture. He knows the importance of the two of us at this time. If something happens to us, he won't be able to defend Talu City alone. He might even lose Xian City. At that time, even if the Mongol army doesn't take his life, the emperor will. Shi Wanshan said firmly. It had to be said that his years in the bandit den had given him a very accurate grasp of people's hearts. Seeing Shi Wanshan's confidence, Ancient River could only choose to believe him. Alright, since that's the case, what should we do next? Chapter 843. Order the army to charge forward. Then you and I will each lead 200 cavalrymen to Tulu City. Let's hope these soldiers can stall for more time. Shi Wanshan's eyes were filled with determination. For his own safety, he had made the decision to sacrifice his main army. This was equivalent to abandoning the safety of the majority of the people. This was not what a qualified general should do. But at this moment, Ancient River also knew that they had no other choice but to do this. Once they acted on their loyalty and traveled with the main force, the final result would be that even their own lives would be lost inside. Okay. After a little hesitation and struggle, Ancient River did not object and agreed to this decision. Then the two of them began to select elite soldiers to supplement the 400 people that they needed to take away. Just as the sky was about to turn dark, Shi Wanshan and Gu He each led 200 elites and set off their troops under the cover of the darkness. Not only did no one in the Baiming army notice them, even the Tatar cavalry scouts who were in charge of monitoring them did not notice them. It was also nighttime. The mighty new mercenary army left the first city and headed straight for Tulu City. Tulu City was the main supply point of the mercenary army. Once it was lost, there was only one way left. For the first city that needed a lot of materials, this was obviously not enough. Even if it was for themselves, the mercenary army had to do something to ensure that Tulu City would not change hands. The sky gradually darkened. Fortunately, there was still some moonlight. Once they got used to the darkness, they could see the road ahead even if they did not use a torch. It was just that their vision was blocked and they could not see too far. Since they could see the road ahead, Tiger's man ordered the soldiers not to use torches. At the same time, he also gave the reconnaissance battalion commander Dingshan a death order to increase the scope of the reconnaissance. Once they found any Tatar scouts, they had to be resolutely eliminated to ensure the concealment of the army. Hu Mang also knew that once the sun rose, he wouldn't be able to hide his whereabouts even if he wanted to. All he wanted was to have a peaceful night and not be discovered by the enemy during the night. Dingshan, who had received the death order, set out. Although there were only 500 scouts in the reconnaissance battalion, every one of them was an elite in the army. Whether it was horsemanship or archery, they were all 1 in a million talents. It was just a night's covert march, so he was confident that he could succeed. The mercenaries didn't move slowly in the dark. After all, they had already familiarized themselves with the environment and terrain of this area. Usually, there were related exercises, and one of them was to explore this area at night. Now, it was just turning the exercise into a real battle, and it was not difficult. Vice Commander, at this speed we will be able to cover half the distance by tomorrow morning. At that time, we will be able to form a triangle with the northern Ming army to contain the sudden appearance of the Tatar army. As Hu Mang rode forward, he did not forget to look at Shibi and ask this question. Could be said to be a miracle in the mercenary army. He was just a surrendered general who had not made any contributions to the army, yet he had suddenly become a regiment commander. At that time, who knew how many people were envious, jealous, and dissatisfied? But soon this person used only 2,000 soldiers to force Agador, who had 15,000 soldiers, into Guangwu town. Everyone was in an uproar. Only now did they know that the sixth young master had great foresight and ability. Soon a new army was established and Shibi was able to get a free ride. He jumped from a regiment commander to a vice commander. This scene made some of the senior officers even more dissatisfied. But considering that this was the decision of the sixth young master, no one dared to say anything. Compared to the dissatisfaction of the others, Tiger's man did not show any emotion. He even thought that it was a good thing that Shibi could be his vice commander. It was because he knew that Shibi was very intelligent, and even the sixth young master praised some of his ideas. So whenever something happened in the army, he would always listen to Shibi's opinion. Yes, commander. Our sudden appearance will definitely give the Tatar army a surprise. At that time they will not be able to attack Tulu city. But at the same time the pressure on us will not be small. We need to be mentally prepared. Shibi had been analyzing the situation on the battlefield the entire time. Although he was once a member of the Tatar army, he was now entrusted with an important task by Yang Chendong. All he thought about was how to repay this kindness. The so-called Tatar army, in his eyes, did not have any friendship. They were only enemies and opponents. Yes, we need to be mentally prepared. But fortunately we still have 6 battalions of musketeers. As long as we do not take the initiative to attack, whoever wants to attack us will not be able to gain any advantage. Tiger's man nodded. Of course, he knew how much pressure it would be to defend Invincible City against 50,000 enemies by himself. However, he was not afraid. The new army was trained by him. Since the establishment of the army until now, they had undergone more than a month of hard training. Their combat strength had already reached the standard that he had expected. Although they could not be said to be very strong, there should not be any problems if it was just defense. You are right, army commander. But the musketeers can only defend against enemies in front. What if enemies appear behind us? Shibi first nodded in agreement, then raised his own doubts. Vice Commander, are you talking about the enemies on Saihan Mountain? Didn't the scouts report that there are only 2,000 people left on the mountain? What kind of situation have they become? Tiger's man's face showed a trace of confusion and disapproval after hearing this. In his opinion, it was only 2,000 enemies. They would not even dare to go down the mountain. How could they be causing trouble? But no matter what, this is a kind of threat. The sixth young master once said that the best way to deal with threats is to eliminate them and not let them exist between heaven and earth. Shibi's voice carried a hint of persistence at this moment. Since he was appointed as the vice commander, he had to plan for other things while he was in the position. Shibi even knew that the reason why he was promoted so quickly and even reached the rank of senior colonel, surpassing many seniors who had joined the mercenary army before him, was because the sixth young master wanted him to assist Tiger's man and help him fill in the gaps. Since he had already set his position, Shibi naturally knew when to persevere and when he only needed to give some pointers. Just like now, he could not back down. Otherwise, even if the sixth young master knew about it, he would be disappointed in him. With Shibi's persistence, Tiger's man's expression also became serious. He had followed Yang Chendong for so many years. How could he not know what the young master was thinking? Seeing that Shibi was not as obedient as he usually was, he asked, "Then what do you think, Vice Commander?" "Take him out. If we do it well, we can even deal a heavy blow to the enemy reinforcements. Although we can't achieve a great victory, every enemy we kill will reduce some of the pressure on us in the future." Shibi immediately revealed his plan. It included a night attack on MT Saihan, setting a trap and waiting for the enemy reinforcements to arrive to deal a heavy blow to them, and so on. Tiger's man listened attentively to this battle plan and nodded in agreement from time to time. When Shibi closed his mouth, his heart was filled with a myriad of emotions. The vice commander that the young master assigned to him was truly a talent, a great talent. If they did as he said, it could indeed solve a lot of problems. Seeing that Shibi was so confident, Tiger's man knew that this battle had to be fought. He immediately said, "All right, we'll do as vice commander says. Take a look and decide which troops to send to carry out these missions." Since Tiger Edge cooperated so enthusiastically, he didn't dare to be careless. He proposed his own ideas in a suggestion manner. What followed was naturally approved by Tiger's man. Then the army continued to move forward. However, as they moved forward, groups of soldiers separated from the army and began to move in another direction. The sky was getting darker and darker. It would be midnight in 2 hours. Gaul's 5,000 cavalrymen and Mazem's 4,000 cavalrymen launched a night attack on the Baiming army's main force in a pincer attack. The iron hooves of the war horses trampled on the ground. Amidst the rumbling, they charged ferociously again and again. Faced with a pincer attack from 2 sides, the Baiming army, which was mostly made up of new soldiers, fell into chaos. When the Kiliarchs wanted to ask for instructions on what to do next, they realized that the commander-in-chief and the commander-in-chief were nowhere to be found. With the battle on the horizon and the commander missing, the already chaotic Baiming army became even more chaotic. Faced with the charge of the Tatar cavalry, they scattered like birds and beasts, unable to put up any resistance. Countless Baiming army soldiers were killed by the Tatar army. Countless Baiming army soldiers had no choice but to throw down their weapons and kneel down to beg for their lives. Ha ha ha. Mazem, who had killed to his heart's content, couldn't help but laugh proudly when he saw tens of thousands of Baiming army soldiers being wiped out. He had done a great service in this battle. When he saw Hubo, he would probably be rewarded. However, his laughter did not last long. The flames that appeared on Mount Saihan not far away attracted his attention. Vice Commander Bella had appeared beside him at some point and said with a panicked expression, "General, someone attacked Mount Saihan. It should be the work of mercenaries." Ayaya. Mazem thought that he had done a great service, but he did not expect his base to be destroyed. At this moment Mazem was furious. Men immediately returned to Mount Saihan. No matter what, we can't let the mercenaries succeed in their scheme. Mazem wanted to go back in person, but he was stopped by Plato in the end. "General, you can't do this out of loyalty. We've just won a big victory here. You can't leave yet. Otherwise, won't all the credit be taken by General Gore? How about this? I'll bring reinforcements. I'll only bring 2,000 cavalry. I believe that with the terrain of our mountain, it's easy to defend and hard to attack. The mercenaries won't succeed so quickly. Wait until you see Lord Hubo, and ask for reinforcements. At that time, we'll attack from one side of the mountain and the other side of the mountain. Wouldn't it be better to achieve a great victory?" Chapter 844. By LA's words made Mazem calm down. He thought that if he left now, then the great merit of destroying the Baiming army would have nothing to do with him. More importantly, even if he went back now, he would only be able to bring back 4,000 cavalrymen. Against the powerful mercenaries, they would not be of much use. It was better to stay here and ask for reinforcements after meeting with Lord Hubo. This was the only way to solve the problem. "All right, General, by law, I'll leave everything to you. However, you must be careful." Mazem listened to this suggestion. However, he did not know that this parting would be the final parting between him and by law. "Please rest assured, General. Once I return to the mountain, I will defend it to the death and wait for General to bring reinforcements." There was no time to lose. After Bai Law finished speaking, he ordered 2,000 cavalrymen to quickly return. Saihan Mountain was easy to defend and hard to attack because of its geographical location. This had also made Mazem and Bai Law extremely confident. All of this had been proven when the Baiming army failed to take it down. However, the mercenaries were not the Baiming army. Attacking a mountain like this was a common part of their training. In addition, they had planned to launch a sneak attack. In addition, they had mobilized 2 battalions of 800 musketeers to assist them. When they launched their attack, the Tatar soldiers guarding the mountain were stunned. In the dark, their vision was limited. They did not know where the mercenaries would come from. If they wanted to see the enemy, they would have to raise their torches. However, if someone did so, it would be equivalent to revealing their position. The mercenaries would teach them a lesson in a matter of minutes. Often, the torches would be lit and extinguished very quickly. After more than 100 Tatar soldiers holding torches were killed, everyone learned their lesson and did not have any intention of revealing their position. Without any light, this created an opportunity for the mercenaries to charge up the mountain. At this moment, there were soldiers who relied on their outstanding mountaineering skills to attack the black stone slope and climb up to the peak of Saihan Mountain. The smoke signal on the mountain had been ignited. It was to inform Ma Zhimu and the others at the foot of the mountain that the situation on the mountain was very critical. If there were no reinforcements, they would not be able to hold on. On the black stone slope halfway up the mountain, Deputy Commander Shibi, who was in charge of commanding this battle, was watching the soldiers launch wave after wave of small attacks. His face was languid, as if he was not treating this battle as a real battle, but more like watching a mock competition. Lu Zhuo, the commander of the recruit division, saw this scene and felt very puzzled. Deputy Commander, why did you only launch a small-scale assault? Our recruit division is fully capable of launching an all-out attack and taking down Mount Saihan in one fell swoop. Don't worry. Let's make some people anxious. The slow-paced Silk Bear wasn't in a hurry at all. He just chuckled as he rode on his horse and watched the new recruits launch small attacks in rows or companies. That's right, Commander Lu. This is a good opportunity to train the soldiers through actual combat. Don't miss it. Lu Zhuo didn't know what Shibi was thinking, but he definitely wouldn't let go of such an opportunity to train the soldiers through actual combat. He immediately nodded solemnly and called over a few regimental commanders, instructing them to use this opportunity to train the soldiers. Once they discovered that a soldier was injured, they were to immediately withdraw and replace him with someone else. In any case, the battle wasn't that intense, so they had plenty of opportunities to do these things. Shibi wasn't in a hurry. Naturally, he was waiting for the fish to take the bait. Just as he expected, Bora led 2,000 cavalrymen and headed straight for Mount Saihan. In order to reach his destination at the fastest speed possible, he didn't even wait for news from the scouts this time. He just sent out the scouts as he flew forward. There was a place called the Creek Valley on the only way to Mount Saihan from Tulu City. During the rainy season in summer, this place would converge into a creek. However, it was usually just a ditch and wasn't very big. It was only about 1 meter deep and 3 meters wide. At this moment, there were 4 firearm battalions of the new independent division lying in ambush here. 1,600 gunmen lay prone in the Creek Valley, aiming their guns. Not far away, the sound of horses galloping on the ground grew closer and closer. 2 cavalry scouts quickly approached. When they were about 30 meters away, they each made a hand gesture and then disappeared to the sides. From the hand gestures, it could be seen that the enemy was already 5 miles away. The sound of horses galloping came from afar and approached. They were less than 2 miles away from the Creek Valley. With the faint moonlight in the sky, they could faintly see the constantly moving silhouettes in the distance. All the firearm soldiers couldn't help but slow down their breathing and relax their bodies. Bang! A flare that was as bright as day suddenly flickered in the air, instantly illuminating the land as if it was daytime. The 2,000 Tatar reinforcements also entered everyone's sight at this moment. Then a roar of fire rang out. Under the sound of gunfire, the land that had returned to night was filled with flowing light. Following that, one after another, the Tatar cavalrymen fell from their horses. Occasionally they would even let out miserable cries. Kill. Right after the sound of gunfire rang out, countless cavalrymen suddenly appeared on both sides of the Creek Valley. The torches in their hands were lit one after another as they charged towards the location of the 2,000 Tatar reinforcements. After 2 rounds of shooting, the Tatar reinforcements threw down at least 500 corpses. When the gunfire finally stopped, the surrounding torches illuminated their faces. Then waves of arrows pierced through the air and landed within the army, causing several hundred people to fall from their horses. The 3,700 cavalrymen of the 9 battalions were lying in ambush nearby. Under the lead of Division Commander Xen Honghai, they were like fierce tigers descending from a mountain as they surrounded the already stunned Tatar cavalrymen. There were bullets from afar, bows and arrows from close range, and sharp sabers from close range. Under wave after wave of continuous attacks, the Tatar cavalrymen's formation was thrown into chaos. Under the illumination of the firearms, every cavalryman's face revealed a frightened expression. Under the protection of a few personal guards, Bai Le's face was ghastly pale. At this moment he knew that he had fallen into a trap. Moreover, from the looks of it, the mercenaries should have been prepared for this and sent a large number of troops. He was impressed by the mercenaries' quick reaction. At the same time he cursed the uselessness of his own scouts in his heart. The enemy was already right in front of his eyes. Why didn't he receive any news at all? The lack of timely information ultimately led to the defeat of this battle. The 2,000 reinforcements only resisted for less than an hour. All of them, including General Bai Law, died in battle. In the end, there were only about 500 injured soldiers. Quickly clean up the battlefield. Send a battalion of people to send these injured soldiers back to Xianxia city. At the same time, send someone to inform the deputy commander on the mountain that this is a great victory. They can take down Mount Saihan. Division Commander Xen Honghai rode on his warhorse and constantly gave out orders. After an hour, the general attack on Mount Saihan began. In less than an hour, the enemy was completely annihilated. Mount Saihan became one of the areas that First City expanded to the south. In the same night, the commander of Wanquan City, Shi Wanshan, and the commander of Wanquan City, Tongji Ancient River, were under the protection of 400 elite cavalrymen. They were rapidly advancing toward Tulu City. They had been running for the entire night. Seeing that the sky was starting to brighten, their whereabouts were finally discovered by the Tatar scouts. Following that, they were pursued and intercepted all the way. At this moment, it could be said that time was life. In order to break out of the encirclement and escape before the main Tatar army appeared, the two generals went through several attacks. The number of soldiers under their command was decreasing. After going through the fifth encirclement, there were less than 50 cavalrymen around them. Even so, the two generals did not intend to give up resisting. They were still fighting with all their might just to be able to return to Tulu City alive. They are over there. Surround them. Don't let them escape. Not far away, another team of 200 Tatar patrols came. When they saw the Baiming army being surrounded, they immediately rushed over with all kinds of strange cries. There were still more than 100 enemies around them. Now that another 200 enemy cavalrymen came, Shi Wanshan immediately felt the pressure increase. He waved his saber and slashed continuously. After killing another Tatar cavalryman, he wiped the blood off his face and forced a smile at Ancient River, who was not far away. "Brother Ancient, it seems that we won't be able to escape. If we can't get out, then we'll just die in battle. Killing one is enough. Killing two is a win. At most, we'll be a hero again after 18 years. Ancient River also forced a smile. Then he tightened his left arm that had been stabbed. He suppressed the bleeding point and waved his left hand once again, charging toward the Tatar cavalryman 5 meters away. At this moment, it was impossible to distinguish between generals and warriors. The heavens were very fair. They only gave each person 1 life. At this moment, if they didn't kill the enemy, they would be killed by the enemy. All schemes and strategies were useless. The saber and the curved horse kept colliding in the air, causing bursts of sparks. After a quarter of an hour, the Baiming cavalry had lost another 40 cavalrymen. Now there were only 10 people left standing, including the two generals. Fortunately, after a lot of hard work, they finally managed to bleed out. Without further ado, the two generals brought several wounded soldiers out of the encirclement and headed toward Tulu City. At this moment, as long as there was a chance, they would fight for it. Even if they died, they didn't want to die on the grasslands. Chase. The remaining 200 Tatar cavalrymen saw that the fat meat in their hands was about to fly away. How could they let it go? They all galloped wildly and chased after Shi Wanshan and the others. When the distance between them was less than 100 meters, a volley of arrows would be fired. Often, 1 or 2 Baiming cavalrymen would fall off their horses and die. Chapter 845. In the blink of an eye, Baiming's cavalrymen, including the two generals, were left with only 4 people. At this moment, their warhorses also showed signs of exhaustion after a night of running. They were no longer as fast as before and became slower and slower. As a result, the relationship between the two sides became closer and closer. The Tatar cavalrymen were not in a hurry to shoot arrows. With such a good opportunity, they wanted to capture the enemy alive and make a great contribution. The distance between them grew closer and closer. From 100 meters to 80 meters, 50 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters, when they could even see the enemy's back clearly, a large group of cavalrymen suddenly appeared in front of them. Looking from afar, smoke and dust billowed. Seeing that the pursuers were about to arrive and the road ahead was blocked, Shi Wanshan's face revealed a pained expression. "Is this my death? Who would have thought that he would lose his life just because he wanted to expand his strength and take down Mount Saihan?" Xianxia unconsciously raised the saber in his hand. At this moment he thought of cutting his own throat. Perhaps this would be a better way to die. Otherwise, if he fell into the hands of the Tatar army, he didn't know what kind of torture he would suffer. "Commander, please wait. Seems to be our own army." Ancient River's eyes were sharp. He saw that the approaching cavalrymen were carrying Baiming's flag and wearing the same battle armor as them. He immediately shouted excitedly. This shout pulled Xianxia back from the brink of death. When he raised his head to look at the source of the shout, there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's right, it's our cavalrymen. Wenfeng must have come to save us. Quick! Charge over, we'll be safe once we charge over." Sometimes a person's potential was limitless. After seeing hope, the speed of the warhorses seemed to have increased unknowingly. The distance between the two sides was also getting closer and closer. The pursuing Tatar cavalrymen also noticed this. Immediately they took out the longbows that were originally on their backs and shot a volley of arrows. Guhi's luck was very bad as he was shot once again. His entire body spat out a mouthful of blood as he lay prone on the back of his horse. Fortunately, Baiming's reinforcements arrived at this moment. Ning Wenfeng, who was leading 2,000 cavalry, commanded the cavalry to return arrows to the pursuing Tatar cavalry. At the same time, he ordered people to rescue the injured General Ancient River. Then he looked at Xianxia, who was in a rather sorry state, and asked, "Commander, are you all right?" "I'm fine. I'm not hurt. Let's return to the city as soon as possible." Xianxia let out a soft sigh. He didn't have any energy left in him as he lay down on the horse's back. Men changed the commander's horse and returned to the city. Ning Wenfeng knew very well that this was not the time to reminisce about the past. Ning Wenfeng's arrival saved the lives of the two generals. On the way back to Tulu City, they encountered several more interceptions. Every time he would take the initiative to send his men to meet the enemy. After losing about 500 cavalrymen several times, he finally made it to Tulu City safely. More than 2 hours after Ning Wenfeng and the others returned to the city, the main force of the Tatar cavalry had already been defeated at the foot of the city. They began to set up camp and assumed a posture of attacking the city at any time. At this moment there were only 2,500 soldiers in Tulu City. It would be very difficult to rely on these men to defend the city. Just as Ning Wenfeng was considering whether or not to abandon the city, a scout reported that a large number of mercenaries had suddenly appeared at the northwest side of the city. They had set up camp at the side of the Tatar army, looking as if they would rush up and take a bite out of the city at any time. There's such a thing? Thinking that the mercenaries had arrived quite quickly, Ning Wenfeng immediately climbed up the city gate tower. Sure enough, he saw the 5-starred flag of the mercenaries 5 kilometers away from the city. While sighing at the mercenaries' quick reaction, he also let out a sigh of relief. Now it seemed that defending the city wasn't necessarily impossible. The Tatar army that had originally been prepared to attack the city had no choice but to rearrange their troops out of fear of the mercenaries. This gave Tulu City a chance to catch its breath. After noon, the Xian mansion's reinforcements arrived after receiving the news. Eunuch Deng Chong led 1,000 old soldiers and 10,000 new recruits. At this moment, there were only 1,000 old soldiers left in the Xian mansion, which was the minimum number they could send. But no matter what, with their arrival, Ning Wenfeng had gained some confidence. He was even more confident in defending Tulu City. In the Tatar army's tent, Hubo listened to the report of last night's battle with a terrifyingly gloomy expression. To be specific, they hadn't suffered any losses. It was true that they had lost Mount Saihan and had lost 4,000 cavalrymen, but they had also wiped out 10,000 of the Baiming army's main force. In other words, they had come out on top. However, Hubo's sudden appearance should have been able to catch the Baiming army and the mercenaries off guard. Now it seemed that while it had some effect, it wasn't enough. In the end, it was all because the mercenaries had interfered. This made Hubo even angrier at the mercenaries than at the Baiming army. "Mazam Gore, I'll give you 3,000 cavalrymen to attack the mercenaries. I want to see how strong they are. General Chiga, I'll give you 5,000 infantrymen. Prepare to take down Tulu City. I want to massacre the city and bury the 4,000 soldiers from last night." Hubo furiously gave out 2 orders. Once the order was given, Mazam and the other 2 who were named were about to leave the tent. However, General Mu Ren, who hadn't been named, suddenly stood up. General, you can't do this. With the mercenaries' strength, 6,000 cavalrymen won't be able to break through. If we send them out, we'll suffer even greater losses. Mu Ren had told Hu Bo about the mercenaries' strength on the way here. He had thought that both sides would listen to his advice and be more careful when facing the mercenaries in the future. However, it seemed that they hadn't taken his advice seriously. Do not shake the soldiers' morale. Generals, why aren't you going to do as I say? Hu Bo was clearly furious. He glared at Mu Ren as if saying that he would kill him if he dared to shake the soldiers' morale. In the end, Mu Ren didn't dare to say anything and stepped back. Since the general had given his orders and was angry, the others naturally didn't dare to disobey. 6,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 infantrymen left the camp and charged towards the north and west. CB had already arrived outside Tulu City from Saihan Mountain and was warmly welcomed by Tiger's Mane. Ah, Deputy Commander, you've worked hard. The travel-worn CB hurriedly took a few steps forward and arrived in front of Hu Mang. He respectfully saluted. Commander, you're the one who's working hard. I'm just following your orders. Speaking of which, if they won the battle, most of the credit should go to the commander. CB's attitude was very good. Since he knew that he couldn't win, he might as well take a step back and keep a low profile. Whether it was Tiger's Mane or the sixth young master, they all knew what he was doing. As expected, Tiger's Mane chuckled when he heard CB's words. In truth, with his position, he didn't care about military merits. The sixth young master trusted him more than anything else. However, CB's actions were also to show his authority, so he naturally wouldn't refuse. In return, he enthusiastically pulled CB's hand and led him to the central tent. The other captains of the other teams followed closely behind him. Previously, it was the battle at Guangwu Town. Now it was the battle at Saihan Mountain. They no longer felt jealous of this newly promoted deputy commander. After all, people would only compare themselves to people of similar strength. However, for someone who was already far ahead of them, it was better to put away such thoughts. The officers of the new army strode into the tent. The moment they entered, they saw a sand table that had been set up at the last minute. It recorded the comparison of the military strength of both sides and the way they were arranged. Tiger's Mane learned this from Yang Chendong. He wasn't the only one who had such a simple sand table in every regiment commander's tent. It was to help them understand the situation on the battlefield better. Everyone followed Tiger's Mane to the sand table. After looking at it, they started to think seriously. About 7 minutes later, he smiled and nodded. The commander's arrangement is already the best. Saying these words proved that he had no other opinions. Tiger's Mane chuckled and said, Deputy Commander, you must have had a hard journey. Why don't you go back to the tent and have a good rest? There's no need. I've already rested on my horse on the way here. CB shook his head and refused. It was true that he had made a military contribution, but this didn't mean that he had any special privileges. Especially in front of Tiger's Mane, he was a junior. Fine. Since Deputy Commander is concerned about military affairs, then let's discuss how to attack the Tatar army. Tiger's Mane nodded. He was just being polite. Now that the small talk was over, it was time to talk about business. Without waiting for the officers to express their opinions on the current situation, the scout battalion commander Ding Shan had already entered the tent. He saluted Tiger's Mane and said, Commander, the Tatar army has moved. There are 3,000 cavalry coming towards our camp from the left and right. You're so petty. When he heard that there were only 6,000 cavalry coming, Tiger's Mane didn't panic at all. Instead, he was somewhat dissatisfied. It was clear that he felt that the Tatar army didn't send enough cavalry. Hearing this, the other officers also burst into laughter. After laughing, Tiger's Mane put away his casual attitude and his expression became more serious. The sixth young master once said that we have to pay attention to the enemy in terms of tactics and look down on the enemy in terms of strategy. Therefore, even if we have the confidence that we will win, we can't be arrogant and we can't be careless. Yes. When the officers heard that it was the sixth young master's order, they all replied seriously. Good. Since the enemy is coming, of course we have to beat them back. Deputy Commander, do you have any thoughts? Tiger's Mane asked out of respect. No. We will listen to Commander's orders. Other than that, there was nothing else to say. Last night when they were marching he had said all his thoughts and Tiger's Mane had also agreed. Now they just had to follow the plan. Chapter 846. Very well, since that's the case, let's proceed according to the plan, Tiger's man nodded. Following this he gave out a series of orders, and the officers who were called stood at attention. The other officers who were not called also earnestly studied. For them, as the mercenary army continued to expand, the number of soldiers they could lead would only increase. The military ranks on their shoulders would also increase, and the number of pentagonal beams would also increase. Learning more about the battle strategy of the Bright Tiger Army commander would naturally be beneficial for their future development. On the battlefield, Gaylor and Mazem each led 3,000 cavalrymen towards the mercenary camp. Although Huboer had rejected Mu Ren's suggestion to fight cautiously, the two generals knew that the mercenary army was not to be trifled with. This time he had to be extremely careful in order to make an enemy out of him. In actuality, from the fact that they had only sent 3,000 cavalrymen each, it was clear that they were testing the mercenary army. Otherwise, Huboer would have sent at least 10,000 cavalrymen. Because it was just a test, the two generals did not charge forward. Instead, they slowly approached, wanting to see how the mercenary army would react to their arrival. Under their watchful eyes, the mercenary camp quickly reacted. Groups of mighty and majestic cavalrymen appeared and walked out of the camp in an endless stream. It was too much for the eyes to take in, and it felt like there was no end to them. However, this feeling quickly disappeared because the cavalrymen had already blocked their vision, making it impossible for the two generals to see what was going on within the mercenary army. General Gaylor lightly sighed. The mercenary army's tricks made him feel a sense of helplessness. On the other hand, Mazem glared at the mercenary army with a look of hatred. It was because of the mercenary army's shameless sneak attack last night that not only had he lost his base at Mount Saihan, but his assets had also been stolen. Even his deputy General Bora had died. Because of this, he was furious, and he wanted to deal a heavy blow to the mercenary army to take revenge for his brothers and vent his anger. As they advanced, the distance between the two sides became closer and closer. When they were 4 li away, they were already within range of the cavalrymen. However, the mercenary army was still in formation and did not seem to have any intention of charging. It's just a bluff. Seeing that the mercenaries were not moving at all, neither charging forward nor retreating, Mazem, who was furious, decided to charge forward and try it out. He wanted to see how strong the other party was. Men, attack. Once the order was given, the 3,000 Tatar cavalrymen moved. Their horses galloped and kicked up clouds of dust on the ground as they charged toward the mercenary cavalrymen. When Gore saw that Majamu had taken the initiative to charge without even greeting anyone, his eyes darkened. At this moment, a deputy general at the side asked, "General, should we also launch an attack together?" "Let's wait and see," Gore said calmly. This was his first time fighting with the mercenaries and he wanted to learn more about them. The left wing did not move. Only Mazem's army rushed out. However, he did not seem to be afraid. There was only the word kill in his eyes. Although there were quite a number of cavalrymen, there was no fear in his eyes. On the battlefield, one could win against many with a few. Perhaps it would happen to him one day. The Tatar cavalrymen were getting closer and closer. Soon the distance between them was reduced from 4 li to 2 li. At such a distance, the cavalrymen should charge. Otherwise, there would not be enough space for them to display their speed. Once they collided, they would be at a disadvantage. Everyone understood this logic, but the mercenaries acted as if they didn't. The cavalrymen remained motionless on their horses. It was as if they weren't facing 3,000 enemy cavalrymen who could kill, or 3,000 sheep who posed no threat at all. Kill. Seeing that the distance between them was close to 2 li and was still shrinking, Mazem's eyes flashed with joy. The mercenaries were so arrogant that they did not intend to charge. In this way, the advantage would be in his hands. Once he got close to the enemy cavalry, he would use the momentum to ram them. At that time, his 3,000 cavalrymen would be able to unleash several times their strength. It was not impossible for them to win. Are they crazy? Men, charge with me. On the other side, Gower saw everything clearly with his eyes. Seeing that the mercenaries were still not moving at such a distance, he was truly shocked. At such a distance, if they did not charge, they would not have a chance to charge. Could it be that the powerful mercenaries were just legends? In reality, they were just infantrymen riding war horses? Unable to understand, Goward decided not to think about it anymore. After all, facing an enemy cavalry that did not know how to charge, this was a heaven-sent opportunity. He could even imagine how Mazam would go on a killing spree once he joined the mercenary army. And such a great merit could not be claimed by him alone. He was bound to take a share of the pie. Gower also moved. The 3,000 cavalrymen charged, but they were only 2 li late. The moment he led his troops to charge, Lu Zhuo, who was standing in the front row of the mercenaries, smiled. With a smile, he suddenly ordered the army to move to the left and right, leaving the center. Although he was leading recruits, there was no problem in following orders. Immediately, the army began to retreat to the left and right. As they left, the 6 brigades of musketeers behind them were exposed. Beside the musketeers was the independent division commander Xen Honghai on horseback. Seeing that his field of vision had become very wide, his originally raised saber also dropped. He shouted, "Fire!" At the front of the battlefield, Mazam was already less than a li away from the mercenaries. He could even see the pale and frightened faces of the mercenaries. At this moment, his heart was extremely carefree. He urged his horse to speed up. His saber could not help but taste blood. Right at this time, the situation on the battlefield suddenly changed. Those frightened mercenaries separated to the sides, revealing the 3,000 mercenaries behind them. Following a loud roar, several thousand bullets flew through the air, passing through the air and arriving in front of them. The distance of 1 li 500 meters was completely within the range of the Type 81 assault rifles. Under the explosive sounds of gunfire, bullets flew out from the barrel like meteors flying through the sky. They drilled into the bodies of the Tatar cavalrymen who were brandishing their sabers, drawing out waves of blood. Mazam, who was charging at the very front, did not avoid this rain of bullets either. One of the bullets landed on his chest. The instant that fatal bullet entered his body, Mazam, who was still shouting and charging forward, was stunned. His saber dropped, and his entire body slid down the back of his horse like a boneless viper. Then he fell from the horse, landing on the ground, bringing with him waves of dust. Even when he died, his body still charged towards the mercenaries' camp, showing his determination to avenge his humiliation with blood. The general died on the battlefield. The omnipresent bullets ran amok among the armored cavalry. One after another, the Tatar cavalrymen were shot and fell off their horses. One after another, the Tatar cavalrymen lost their lives while still shouting to charge. All of this happened too fast, so fast that many people could not react in time. As the cavalrymen at the very front fell off their horses and died one by one, the Tatar cavalrymen behind them finally felt fear. They did not even have the chance to fight with the enemy and were about to be shot to death. No one wanted to see this kind of scene, and no one was willing to encounter it. Quick, retreat, retreat. They knew that rushing forward would only lead to their own deaths. More and more Tatar cavalrymen reined in their horses, turned their horses around and began to run back the way they came. There were some brave warriors among these Tatar cavalrymen. They were not as afraid of death as ordinary people, but this kind of unequal slaughter, this kind of aggrieved death, was definitely not what they wanted in their hearts. So at this moment, they would rather be a coward and turn around to escape than to show their courage and charge forward half a step. As if they had expected them to do this, the cavalry of the recruit division at the front once again opened up a path. The head of the light cavalry regiment, Ma Xianxia, shouted, "Comrades, charge with me." The light cavalry regiment moved. The biggest change in the new army was that they had a heavy cavalry regiment and a light cavalry regiment. Like the name, heavy cavalry was a full body armor, and focused on the art of opening and closing. They were like a flood of steel rushing into the enemy formation to kill the enemy. The light cavalry was a light military uniform, focused on flexibility and speed. They did not have much other equipment on them except for the necessary sabers and crossbows. What they wanted was to use the lightest equipment to chase down the enemy cavalry with the fastest speed. When the light cavalry regiment moved, it represented the start of the chase. After Ma Xianxian's shout, countless light cavalry flew out like arrows, heading straight into the distance. As they galloped, the crossbows in their hands were not idle. Arrow after arrow shot out into the air, chasing and killing the defeated enemy cavalry at the same time. The sudden sound of the muskets and the sudden attack of the light cavalry made Gao Er's 3,000 cavalrymen suffer. They originally thought that when they were 1 li away, the cavalrymen would be able to display their strongest fighting strength. They never thought that there would be so many dangers behind the mercenary cavalrymen. Time after time they had to move aside, giving them different experiences. First he was struck dumb by the muskets. By the time he managed to turn his horse around in time, the enemy cavalry behind him quickly caught up with him. When the arrows got close to him he could only watch as the soldiers he brought with him were shot by the arrows and fell to the ground. His heart was bleeding but there was nothing he could do. Chapter 847. Underestimating the enemy was not scary. What was scary was that his cavalry had been beaten into a pulp and had lost their will to fight. With such an iron cavalry, it would be difficult to calm them down and turn back to fight. They could only rush toward the Tatar camp and hope that the enemy would not chase too hard. As expected, the light cavalry did not chase too far and stopped after 6 miles. Ahead of them was the Tatar camp, and the enemy could send their cavalry to counterattack at any moment. Although they were light cavalry and were not afraid of being caught, there was no point in fighting. The light cavalry retreated and kept their guns. This probing mission ended in a huge victory for the mercenaries. Based on the results, they had killed close to 2,000 cavalry and captured 100 enemies. Not only did they lose the first battle, but even General Mazem had died on the battlefield. When this result reached Huboer's ears he was furious. Within the tent, the table was sliced in half by a sharp cavalry knife. A roar sounded out. "Mazem, I will take revenge for you." Mazem had defended Saihan Mountain for many years, and even if he did not contribute much he had put in a lot of effort. However, when Huboer's army appeared and was about to show off their skills he was killed. It was truly regretful and sad. All of a sudden the morale of the Tatar camp was low. To break this bad atmosphere Huboer roared out once more. "Where is General Chiga? Has he not taken down Tala City?" The flames of war raged beneath Tulu. Countless cloud ladders were erected beneath the city walls, and countless arrows were fired in the air. Death was a matter of great importance to humans, but at this moment, it seemed so insignificant and ordinary. When the Iron Cavalry started to probe the mercenaries, the 5,000 grassland infantry led by Chiga had launched a fierce attack on Tala City. It was said that the grassland Iron Cavalry were unparalleled in the world. Everywhere they went, locusts would sweep past and not a single blade of grass would grow. However, what everyone didn't know was that the trained grassland infantrymen were also elites among soldiers. They existed for the purpose of sieging cities, and their instructors were generals with rich experience in sieging cities. The grassland cavalry relied on speed, while the Ming army relied on the city walls. Both sides had their advantages and it was difficult for one side to gain the upper hand. As time passed, Ming Qingzu conquered the 5 grasslands and opened up the path of the Ming army's Iron Cavalry. After the Mongol soldiers suffered losses time and time again, they started to learn from the strengths of the Ming army to create offensive infantry. A person's greatest ability lies in learning and imitating. After Ming Qingzu passed away, the advantage of the Ming army cavalry slowly disappeared. As a result, the Mongol siege infantry grew. This time the 5,000 infantrymen had this ability. Their teachers were the captives of the Ming army who had their cities conquered. Since they were living under someone else's roof, they had no choice but to lower their heads. In order to survive, not many of them could reject the mere teaching of skills. Because of this, the Mongol army that was attacking the city was really aggressive. The moment they appeared they beat up the Baiming army. The 3,000 new Baiming soldiers that were in charge of defending the city suffered heavy casualties. Cries of emergency continuously entered the ears of General Ning Wenfeng, who was in charge of the formation. He had no choice but to bring 1,000 old soldiers and 3,000 new soldiers to re-enter the city and stabilize the situation. On the battlefield, the biggest difference between the new soldiers and the old soldiers was the amount of battle experience. Usually the experienced old soldiers knew what to do without orders. They could freely counterattack and attack when they should and dodge when they shouldn't. The new soldiers were different. They were like a heavy stone mill. If you pushed them they would move. If you didn't push them they would be as immovable as a mountain. When these new soldiers came to the battlefield, They were terrified by the aura of death on the battlefield. Without orders, how would they know what to do? When the new soldiers lost, the old soldiers went up. The new and old soldiers helped one another, and Ning Wenfeng's commanding ability was displayed. He chased back the Mongol infantry that had charged up the city walls. After a few rounds, they finally lasted until nighttime and the offensive came to an end. Within the city lord's manor, the injured ancient river was still resting on the bed. Shi Wanshan, who had mostly recovered, and eunuch Deng Chong were sitting in the hall, talking to the exhausted Ning Wenfeng. Eunuch Deng, commander, the losses in this battle are too great. More than 2,000 new recruits have died and 2,000 have been injured. If this continues, I'm afraid it will be difficult to defend the city. Why don't we retreat to the Xian mansion? The city walls there are higher and it will be much easier to defend than Tulu City. Ning Wenfeng grumbled while probing. His eyes were filled with hope. We can't. Deng Chong was the first to speak. The two generals might not know, but when the Duke of Loyalty and Courage gave Talu City to the Great Ming, everyone in the imperial court clapped and cheered. The people of the capital also took to the streets and lit firecrackers to celebrate. Everyone took Talu City as a symbol of the rise of Baiming. How could we give it up at this moment? If we really did this, there would be no need for anyone else. Just the memorials from the imperial censors would be enough to crush us to death. Deng Chong's words made Shi Wanshan, who originally wanted to say something, shut his mouth immediately. If this really was the case, Talu City could not be lost. Otherwise, their political lives would come to an end. At that time, no matter how great their ambitions were, they would be powerless to carry them out. Hold on a little longer. If we really can't do it, we'll transfer all the new soldiers from the Xian manor. As long as we take the stance of defending to the death, no matter how fierce the Tatar army is, they will know the difficulties in retreat. Shi Wanshan thought that there was still a strong mercenary army outside the city, and his heart was a lot more comforted. Ning Wenfeng was just probing, and since there was no other way, he didn't consider it. As for transferring soldiers from the Xian manor, after a moment of hesitation he said, perhaps this is the only way. Otherwise, the 2,000-some veterans and 5,000 new soldiers in the city won't be able to last for very long. Fine, then we'll transfer soldiers from the Xian manor. First, we'll transfer 500 veterans and 10,000 new soldiers. Deng Chong finally made the decision. At this point, there were only 500 veterans and 10,000 new soldiers left in the Xian manor. This would be their final strength. They had exerted great strength, suffered great losses, and gained nothing in the end. They still had to bitterly defend Talu City, to the extent that they had almost used up all the veterans. It had to be said that this time they had really made a loss. This result left Shi Wanshan and the other two speechless for a long time. They didn't even seem to have the mood to talk. In comparison, the atmosphere in the Tatar army camp was much better than it was in the afternoon. Chiga had already reported the casualties. During the attack during the day, more than 1,000 soldiers had died and more than 1,000 were injured. They only needed to rest for a night, and more than half of them could still participate the next day. In comparison, Baiming's defenders had suffered more than 4,000 casualties, which was twice the number of their own side. Everyone knew that during a siege, the attacking side would often be at a disadvantage. Generally speaking, to siege a city, one had to have at least 3 times the strength of the enemy. This time the results were the exact opposite. The losses of the defenders were more than double that of the attackers. Even if they didn't take down the city, it was still a great victory. Hu Bo-er's expression was much better and he encouraged Chiga. He said that they would continue to attack the city tomorrow and try to take down Talu City, as well as find a place for the army to settle down. Chiga naturally nodded towards his words. Compared to ordering the Baiming army to continue attacking, Hu Bo-er's attitude towards the mercenaries was something that Hu Bo-er could not grasp. Today's battle had given him a deeper understanding of the strength of the mercenaries. While he regretted not listening to Mu Ren's advice, he also decided to listen to his advice, which was to defend and not go out. They would wait until they took down Talu City and found a place to settle down before slowly making their next move. However, in order to prevent what happened during the day from happening again, Hu Bo-er called over another general, Hu Lin, and told him to prevent the mercenaries from sneaking into the camp before going to sleep. The truth proved that Hu Bo-er's worries were unnecessary. The mercenaries who had won during the day were sleeping peacefully in their own rooms. To them, the battle during the day was unavoidable, and it was a test between both sides. Even if it did not happen today, it would happen tomorrow. Once the test was over and they knew that they were not to be messed with, the Tatar army would be much more obedient. That way, the mercenaries would be able to sleep peacefully. Of course, there were still soldiers on duty at night. It was better to be safe than sorry. As the sun rose, a new day arrived and Tiger's Man held a meeting. The various divisions and regiment commanders all came out to request for battle. In response, Tiger's Man did not say anything, and he only laughed at the vice commander beside him. Shibi also smiled and said, "Today the army will rest and clean up the camp. If there is time, the various divisions and regiments can train on their own. They would not initiate an attack." This was the result of the discussion between Tiger's Man and Shibi last night. Now was not the time to fight one-on-one, and it was either you die or I die. Since there were 3 sides, if it was possible, it would be much better to just sit back and watch the tigers fight. Sitting back and watching the Baiming army and the Tatar army wear each other down, what was wrong with that? Shibi's words represented the intentions of the new army, and the other regiments and regiment commanders all left angrily and did their own things. Tiger's Man also informed the 6th young master of his and Shibi's decision, and they just sat back and watched the situation unfold. In the Tatar army camp, the scouts spread out for 8 miles and only stopped when they saw that they were about to reach the mercenary camp. Then they attacked Tulu city with all their strength, as if they would not stop until they had taken down the city. In response, the Baiming army chose to defend the city with all their strength. Commander Shi Wanshan personally went up to the city tower and took the place of Commander Ning Wenfeng to defend the city, blocking the Tatar army's fierce attacks on the city again and again. In just one day, both sides had suffered considerable losses. Fortunately, on that night 500 veterans and 10,000 new soldiers came to help, temporarily stabilizing the situation. Otherwise, it would have been extremely difficult to defend the city the next day. In the beginning city, Yang Chendong only glanced at the telegram sent by Tiger's Man and put it aside. The new army had Tiger's Man, who had gradually calmed down, and was led by Shibi, so he did not have to worry about anything. His gaze was more focused on the construction of the beginning city, and he made some very constructive suggestions. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.